Can I have a roll call?
Trustee Bree. Here. Trustee Hallwax.
Here.
Trustee Rubin.
Here.
We have a quorum. And for the record, there are other members of the village board present this evening, as well as the village president. So,
are there any public comments? Can I have a motion to approve the minutes, or are there any changes that were needed?
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Okay, Nikki, if you want to fire away.
All right. Okay. On tonight's agenda, I will be very quick and brief with the October treasurer's report. There's not a whole lot to report here. And then we'll do a very brief update of the CIP monthly update. And then we'll dive right into the budget. Everything's fine. Morning, the remote here. Okay, so included in the packet is the monthly financial report, monthly treasurer's report for the month of October. Couple things to note this month, our property taxes are obviously lower than last year. We are now diving into fund reserve by $4.6 million because of the delay on the Cook County property tax bills. We did receive the November tax agency rate report that has our final extension for 2021, and a lovely surprise from Cook County that our EAV dropped by about the equivalent of about $300,000 in our levy. We reached out to the county to determine why that happened. And what they told us was that there was a state equalizer that was applied to the entire county of Cook when they were processing the levy. And when that happens, essentially the county goes through their process to determine all the assessments. They apply their equalization factor. And then the state of Illinois looks at assessments statewide, and that anyone that seems a little out of whack, the state will apply an equalization factor. So that happened in the entire district that we're in Cook County. So our neighbors saw similar decreases in their EAV too.
Why does that translate to a reduction in the tax when I always thought that EAV could go up, down, or whatever? It's about the gross dollar.
It is about the gross dollar, but the cap that's applied to our property tax levy uses the EAV in the calculation. So if the EAV goes down, it also brings the levy down a little bit, because the percentage of decrease in the EAV is similar to the percentage of decrease of the property tax levy. And that was the answer that we got from the county. So, what's causing this?
So the statute has the EAV as part of it. It's
Part of
not
the
merely that you can't levy more than 5%. You can't have more than the PTEL limit over your prior year's collections.
It's not that simple.
It's not that simple.
Because
Are they right?
They are right. I mean, I don't know, without seeing the other assessments statewide, I don't know the justification for their equalization factor, but I do know that it was applied equally to this area.
No, but they're right about the statutory formula that we're stuck with. Okay,
It is in line.
I'd
with-
never heard it that way
The
before.
Department of Revenue has a detailed manual that goes with the calculation. So I spent some time trying to figure out why this was the case. And essentially the answer was that what I glean away from what we heard from the county is that this area might have been a little over assessed compared to other areas in the state. So they took our assessments down when applying the levy.
Now, this may be dumb, but is EAV the value of the whole of all the houses? I mean, mine went up by 50%.
Yes, and that was what we reached out to the county to say, anecdotally, we're hearing from our residents that all of our assessments went up very high.
Right.
So how could this possibly be the case? And when you look at the calculation of the EAV, we added new growth this year, so it was going up. But then when they had to apply this equalization factor only for the purposes of calculating the tax levy. So again, what that tells me is that they're looking at $1 million home that was assessed in Glencoe, and they're looking at $1 million home in the western suburbs, and they were not assessed equally. So the state took our assessments down.
Still don't understand it, but it's nothing we can do about it, but
No,
I still don't
no.
understand it.
The good news of it, though, is that even though our overall extension was decreased in accordance with PTEL, we are slated to receive what they call a tax levy adjustment. And you might recall, we've talked about this in prior finance committee meetings, that the county is now levying an additional amount to make up for any amounts that were deducted from our property tax distributions last year as a result of refunds. So it almost cancels out. The reduction in the levy extension is about 300,000, but the additional amount that we're getting in levy adjustments for refunds is about 225. So the overall impact isn't awful, and we're lucky that we have that offset of the increase. But that was kind of a surprise for us, and we wanted to share that with you because we didn't expect that to happen, especially after what we've heard from our residents and what we thought was going to happen. And I was not alone, because after we reached out to the Cook County, they sent something out to everyone explaining that this is what happened. So it's strange.
Does that,
new bills are due.
The new bills are available, so the bills were posted online today. And all of our very diligent residents that were going on to pay their bills crashed the treasurer's website as well.
It was down for about an hour and a half.
So hopefully that'll be back up tomorrow. We'll start seeing distributions. We did receive notification that Cook County is starting to send distributions out. We did not receive anything today. So unfortunately, it's a little haphazard in Cook County. There's other Cook counties that'll tell you what days you're receiving your distributions. We just don't know.
Do the new bills reflect the new valuations, or is that not till next time?
Next time.
Any other? I know.
We were, to Nikki's point, trying to decipher the manual that goes along with all of this. It is written in a language with which neither of us are very familiar. But it seems to be right. So continue to look into that. I will say it that way.
And I haven't seen the state apply an equalization factor personally in a community that I work for. So this is the first time I've seen that happen. I've certainly had a lot of problems on the county level.
That's a fair question.
start with the statute.
We can look into a little bit more and see if we can get a better explanation from the county on what exactly happened.
I think the other struggle with it is this normally comes out in July. We received it on a Friday with all comments being required back by Monday. So, everybody's on a fast pace here. And I think that's another struggle with it, is that there was very little time given to really absorb what we're trying to understand, which is something that's outside of the norm.
And a note that said they would not correct anything if we
Right.
did find an error.
Yeah, even if you found an error, just tell us about it. We're not going to do anything. So I think it does speak to the fact that we will see a tumultuous 2023 with respect to Cook County and property taxes as they continue to work their way through the issues that we've been dealing with already, in addition to this and other changes that we're going to probably have to deal with along the way.
I have to say that in the report.
Trustee Underdog, thank you for paying your property taxes
I don't
today.
think so.
We appreciate it.
Just say that tax bills are available now. That'll be the summary. Yeah, okay, good news then, sales taxes, they're higher than this time last year. Our July sales were reported this month, and then we're at 108% of budget, so that continues to perform well. This is the fourth receipt in a row reflecting a decline. We did listen to the feedback from the committee last month. We extended the history in the report, And we can go back a little bit further if you'd like, if you want to take a look at that and see if that's helpful. We also followed up on the parking spot analysis. We had talked about this a few months ago about whether or not the reserve parking in downtown is making a difference. Essentially, the end result of it is that it's really not making a difference. 4 out of 5 of the downtown businesses that had reserve spots experienced increases in their sales year over year. For those that had 3 or more spaces, their sales increased by 1.6%. If they had 1 space, it was an average of 5%. And without any reserve spaces, those businesses saw a 5.3% increase. So there's really no sensical pattern to it. So I can't say definitively that it's really making a difference. But we did go back and look at that. Income tax, permit revenue, utility tax, and places for eating tax are all higher than last year, so we're continuing to perform strong. And then the water fund, debt service, motor fuel, and capital projects funds are all performing within line with expectations. Overall, when we look at the revenue budget and where revenues are coming in, the general fund is looking at $810,000 of receipts over budget. That's even with a projected decrease in the property taxes. So the rest of our revenues are really carrying that, the sales tax, the utility taxes. And then the water fund is projected at $370,000 over budget. So we're starting to see really that revenue from those smart meters. And then on the inflationary impacts from the departments in terms of any supply chain issues or increases in costs, the good news is we haven't seen anything new. So we have nothing new to report other than the issues that we're already having. Any other questions on the treasurer's report? Okay, so at this point, I'm gonna hand it over to Stella to give us an update on the golf club.
So October turned out to be a pretty good month, despite the rain. We did have 900 rounds over budget, and we doubled our budgeted revenues for the month. So it was a very good month. We did start work on the croquet court, and we reused all of the sod that was already there because we had a couple of chipping greens there. So Dave, our genius superintendent, we stripped all of the bent grass sod up and put it throughout the golf course on projects, created UTs, patched up some areas. We used about 6,000 square feet of bent sod, which if we had to pay for would have been $10,000. So it was a good use of being sustainable and reusing the product that we had there. Friends of the Glencoe Golf Club is doing well. They're currently working with another person that is going to be doing fundraising for them. So we will have 2 people campaigning for funds. They've taken the request of the board to raise as much as possible very seriously. We have a board meeting tomorrow night. At what point we're going to talk about strategies and what their plan is moving forward.
Any questions for Stella? Okay, moving right along. Have a quick update on CIP.
So this evening, my update is very brief. You have your top 4 projects here that are going to be completed in 2022, and the bottom 4 items are going to be moved to 2023. We will be going over the CIP later in the draft budget presentation, so I'll leave it very brief for this evening. Thank you.
Okay, now is the book. So tonight we'll start with a brief overview of the budget. We'll hit some of the highlights, and then each of us will take turns kind of walking you through the department budgets so you don't have to hear me talk all night. And then we'll round it out with the CIP and the corresponding financing plan.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the calendar year 2023 budget presentation. I have a sense that because of the time that the finance committee at least has spent over the last several months, there are not going to be many, if any, surprises that the finance committee will hear. But given the fact that not all of the trustees participate in that committee on a regular basis, we will go through the budget tonight with some level of detail And of course, encourage questions on any aspect of what we're talking about. I think what we always try to do as we start this discussion is to contemplate what went into the development of the budget. What are the major factors that drive the spending plan that staff has proposed and that is in front of you this evening? I think it's important to note, as we do each year, everything that is proposed in the budget is paid for in the budget. There are resources available either through revenues that are generated on an annual basis for operating expenditures and or the use of fund balance reserves to pay for those one-time capital investments across any number of our funds. We will walk you through that. And it's an important, I think, just point to make as we kind of step off into the review of the budget. Of course, this year continues the robust investment in capital that we started in 2022. This year was a very busy year. Next year will be as well. And Public Works will walk you through a lot of the CIP recommendations. But we are looking at, almost 7.9 million in capital investment across all of our areas, and that includes rolling stock as well. Along those lines, inflation and supply chain disruptions continue to be flummoxing. As we've reported back, we had ordered squad cars in January. That order was canceled in October. We've already pre-ordered vehicles in the hopes that we will get at least a few of them in the coming fiscal year. But we are seeing changes in the commodities market, in the equipment market that we've never witnessed or experienced before. There are Public Works specialty vehicles that we could see up to 48 months of lead time on. I can't say whether that's true or whether that's just an estimate right now, but those are some challenges that we have tried to work through in terms of resources that we've tried to allocate in the draft budget. And of course, staffing impacts continue to be a major focus. We remain down 9 public safety officers out of 26 sworn. At the public safety officer rank. We are continuing to very aggressively recruit, particularly lateral candidates, into those roles. But that's going to be a continuing struggle that the Public Safety Department works through during the course of this year, and I would guess subsequent years. That's going to impact overtime. It's going to impact the work that department is able to complete outside of their regular necessary responsibilities. We filled 11 administrative positions across the organization in 2022. We filled 10 in 2021. We are continuing at this robust breakneck pace of recruitment. We are seeing changes in what prospective employees expect from the village and us as an employer. And so we're going to continue to be focused on that. That takes there are allocations focused in this budget on that effort. Continuing what we were able to accomplish in previous fiscal years. This past year, we were awarded some grant funding. I will say the Safe Routes to School funding has been awarded to us for a long time. I'm really hopeful that 2023 is going to be the year we actually get to invest those dollars. Those were awarded to us in 2018, and obviously we've spent some time talking about that. But this significant grant from the state of Illinois relative to the crib wall replacement at Lakefront Park, that is a joint project between the village and the park district. We are each allocating resources in our upcoming budgets to match the resources that were provided by the state. That was a direct result of some of the direction that the board provided to us last year in terms of being much more aggressive to seek out and find outside dollars wherever possible. So that's going to be a focus that we continue to maintain. This is a year for state mandates coming into play. We are budgeting and allocating resources for 2 significant state mandates that will continue to be a cost center for us in the coming years. Lead water service line replacements, as we've talked about a few times, is going to be something that we kick off this year. Dave Mao will talk a bit about that a little later. And then body cameras for public safety, which is again a state mandate that we be in operation by the end of 2020 or by the beginning of 2025. Realizing the lead time on those, we are getting started in 2023. And I will say the cost for this project is not borne on the cameras. The cameras are the cheap part. The expensive part is going to be the way that we have to administer these new regulations, particularly in light of the Freedom of Information Act and how we will have to be responsive to requests for that body camera data. So over the coming years, these are going to be issues, both of these are going to be issues that are ongoing impacts to the organization. I've talked a bit over the last several months about the continuing need to assess and reassess and reassess the way that we do what we do here at the village. We will talk through this evening about a few recommendations that we have to add a few additional bodies into the overall staff count here with our team, and to focus our efforts to continue to evolve the service level and the service model that we provide. So we'll be talking a bit about that as it relates to a customer service representative, a facilities manager, and then applying some new benefit expenses for part-time employees in the Public Works Department. As you are well aware, we have 2 collective bargaining agreements that both provide a 3% cost of living adjustment for those employees. We have applied that same adjustment to non-union employees, as well as resources for merit bonuses for non-union employees. So we have a lot that's gone into this document. I know you have all received an extensive budget book of approximately 300 pages. All of what we'll talk about will not encompass a night that would require a page-by-page turn. But if there are questions as we go, we're going to try to point you to page numbers as best as we can. If there are questions that you have as you peruse the document, please stop us along the way. But as Nikki said, we're going to go through the budget. We're going to have the departments provide brief overviews of their operating budgets, and we'll spend some time on our capital requests for next year. And then take any feedback that you have before the December 15th village board meeting, where we'll be asked to consider approval. So I will now get out of the way and hand it back to Nikki, our very capable finance director.
Thank you both. Okay, so again, we won't take you through page by page, but I'm going to take you a little bit further into the weeds. So the overall budget is 34.3 million in revenue and 37.6 in expenditures when we exclude the pension funds. Those are just really our main operating funds, our main functional funds that we use day-to-day basis. On the expenditure side, if you can believe it, it's actually only a 0.5% increase over last year. Some of that has to do with capital, but we are using reserves, obviously. We are presenting a balanced budget in accordance with financial policies, with one-time drawdowns of fund reserves for capital projects, and also using GO bond proceeds that were issued in a prior year. So when we look at the village's balanced budget policy, our operating revenues are more than our operating expenditures, and we're drawing on fund balance on only one-time expenditures. When we include the pension funds, we separate that out because we have very little control over the pension funds. They're all statutorily controlled. But when we aggregate that total, the expenditures become 41.8 million and 38.2 in revenue. The breakdown of the one-time use of reserves for capital is on the screen. The largest areas that we're drawing down on reserves are the general fund reserve, and that's in accordance with our policies. And then also the capital fund reserve, which is essentially made up of leftover bond proceeds from that 2021 referendum issue, that first installment. The other major piece of the budget that we'll be going through is the 10-year community investment plan. Total over the 10-year period, we're looking at $52.3 million in capital investment into the community, with, as Phil mentioned, just shy of 8 million proposed for next year. We'll go into this in a moment when we get into the CIP, but we're also planning for a $4.3 million alternate revenue bond. That would be for water fund infrastructure projects and would be fully funded by water fees. This chart is included in the budget summary tab. It's on page 70 in the budget if you'd like to look at it. This is an abbreviated version of that chart. And this shows the breakdown by fund of total revenues and total expenditures that are proposed in this budget year. As I mentioned, you can see in the surplus / deficit column, it's the second one from the right, that shows the excess or deficit of revenues and expenses that are proposed. Any of those numbers that are negative, that are in parentheses, are all one-time capital expenditures, with the exception of the capital projects fund that's bond proceeds, but it's still capital. The only other item that I want to point out is our police pension fund has a deficit of $291,000 this year. That is because we had so many retirements in the last year. So we're seeing our benefit payroll grow quite a bit. That will self-equalize over time. So the calculation of our required contribution is always 1 year behind. So that will naturally catch up. We'll see an increase likely in our contribution for two reasons, not only the addition to our pension payroll, but also wherever the market lands on December 31st. So we really hope for a market rally at the end of the year. Everyone cross their fingers. When you look at the very bottom line, looking at our proposed fund balance, that last purple gray column, all of our funds are proposed to end their end the year within budgetary fund targets within policy. Our general fund is proposed to end the year with a 40% fund balance. So we are in excess of our fund balance target right now. But as you can see, and we'll talk about in a moment with the financial forecast, we do have plans to draw that down for capital. So we are purposefully building up that general fund balance so that we can spend it on capital that we know we'll need over the next 10 years. The same is true in the water fund, although that number is quite higher because we are projecting that we'll have bond proceeds before the end of calendar year 2023 in that fund balance, which will drive that number up. So it's about 91%, which will not stay there. That is for the purposes of capital. On our budget revenue side, again, I'm just going to focus on those funds excluding the pension funds. $34.3 million. The largest proportionate shares in the general fund, which is the main operating fund of the village. That's where the majority of our departments live, all of our personnel expenditures, followed by our two enterprise funds, the water fund and the golf fund. So consistent with the service-based organization, you would expect the largest proportionate expenditure to be personnel, and that's where those expenditures lie in those operating funds. On the expenditure side, it's a very similar story with the general fund at 61% of expenditures, the water fund at 16%, but in this case, the third in line is the capital projects fund at 8.4% of the budget. That's the lion's share of where our capital lies, aside from the water fund in this budget. So that's just a high level overview of what we're proposing this evening. The financial forecast, we did review this in detail last month, but this is on pages 24 to 42 in the budget document. So I'm sorry, I'm going to take you backwards for a minute. This financial forecast sets the tone for the budget. That's why we did it ahead of time. As a quick review, the major factors that we reviewed for those of you that were not here for the first time that we reviewed this. Our primary focus was reinvestment into the community through infrastructure improvements, really adjusting and planning to make sure that we're flexible for any changes that happen at the state level. Bill just reviewed several mandates that we're going to have to be dealing with, that we have to finance locally. And then also monitoring our revenues that flow through the state. We're now at 25% of our revenue flowing through the comptroller's office, which is a large, scary number. That's 25% of our general fund revenue that has to pass through the state before we receive it. That makes us very vulnerable to any changes in state legislation or any changes that could happen during the state budget process. So that's something we just want to be mindful of, regardless of not having much control over it. And also logistical challenges and rising costs. Phil mentioned this earlier in his introduction, but really looking at those delays and how we plan for vehicle and equipment replacement when we don't know when we're going to receive them. And also understanding that we are starting to see supplies, commodities, and a lot of our repair parts go up in cost. So we projected that forward. The 10-year CIP has a full financing plan that we'll review later. And we've identified needs that will be funded through referendum versus alternate revenue bonds that we've talked a little bit about at Finance Committee. And then we'll also go into detail with the forecast, trying to design fee structures around costs, particularly in our enterprise funds. Those are designed to be self-sustaining funds largely, and that is why we are proposing increases in the water rates. Stella's also proposing some increases in our golf rates as well to help support those funds and let them operate somewhat independently. The garbage services fee, that contract will be on the board agenda for this Thursday. So in line with that contract renewal, we're also proposing an increase in that fee, along with sewer fees to help make sure that we're covering costs. Again, Margaret will go through the fee and fine analysis in a little bit more detail, but our main focus here is to make sure, as we're seeing our operating costs increase, our personnel, cost of personnel are increasing, the cost of commodities, the cost of infrastructure, we have to make sure that we're charging to cover that. On a revenue projection standpoint, this is the first time in 40 years that we're facing inflation at these levels, the first time that we've ever seen a property tax increase at a PTEL cap reach this level. It's kind of an unprecedented time, and we also don't know what's going to happen next year. So we did kind of our best guess in the financial forecast to determine where our revenues will be coming in next year, understanding that this time next year we might be in a recessionary environment. So we are projecting slight decreases in sales taxes and income taxes with that in mind. It is a conservative estimate, but it's really anyone's guess at this point where we'll be next year. Because we are projecting decreases in these two major revenues and some of our other smaller ones, that makes it all the more important to levy our property tax levy at the max. Because we are non-home rule, we really have no choice, not a lot of options to diversify our revenue. So you'll see that the property tax levy is recommended at the full freight to help offset those anticipated decreases. Moving on to financial policies. I'm going to take you forward again. These are on pages 44 to 55. We've also reviewed these at the Finance Committee level. I'll just highlight the changes that we made with the current year budget. Fund balance policy, we've talked at length that this year we may be revisiting this discussion. In the current policy as it exists today with our general fund reserves, we are targeting to get to 25%. It's a higher percentage that we've ever been at. So what we have been proposing is to phase this in at 1% increases annually. The current budget before you today is proposing a 17% fund balance reserve target, and that would be calculated on operating expenditures in the general fund. The current reserve as of the end of the month with the financial report that we presented earlier is sitting at 53%. That's as of November 1st. That's well in excess of our target. But as I mentioned before, we do have plans to spend that down. So we're in good shape to start raising that target level. The property tax levy, I think I've really driven this home. But the other item that I want to point out within this policy is that this budget does assume that we are going to abate any debt payment that would be associated with the alternate revenue bonds in the water fund. So the water rate increases that we're proposing, the infrastructure expenditures that we're proposing, we believe that we can afford to abate that property tax levy, basically don't levy it, and we'll make that debt payment with the existing revenues and fund balance that we have in the fund. Moving on to pension funding. So we talked a little bit about this. These are statutorily controlled. We did calculate the police and fire pension contributions based off of our latest funding policy. That policy was just revised by the committee earlier. The police pension contribution in this budget is just over $2.6 million. It's an 8.4% increase over last year. That's with exceeding our investment target for the year. So really what's driving that is the change in policy, the commitment of the finance committee and the village board to start paying down that unfunded liability. So that's really kind of what's driving that increase. We do unfortunately expect that to go up again next year based off of this policy, but also based off of where the market lands. So our hope with the policy that we have in place is that if we continue to fund at an elevated level, that will smooth our contributions over time. So that's really what we're targeting, so we won't see the sharp increases. The fire pension contribution is going to stay right around $50,000. That's to fund our one remaining beneficiary in that fund. And that funding will continue for the remainder of her life. Moving on pages 57 to 68, we'll move into the fee and fine schedule. I will turn it over to Margaret to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks so much, Nikki. So this evening, I'll be presenting some highlights from the fee and fine schedule analysis. You can find this on pages 56 to 68 that Nikki just said. She also just talked about a few of these items in her financial forecast. So I'll give you just a little bit more detail with that. So as part of our budget development process, staff annually reviews various fees, fines, and charges for village services. Every year, staff puts out a survey to neighboring communities, and we compare our fees and fines with them. This year, we actually had 5 additional communities outside of this area that participated in the survey and gave us a little bit more look into the different fees that are in this area. So first, you can see the water rates have been proposed to be increased by 7%. This is in line with the recommendation included in the water rate analysis report and to pay for planned capital improvements in the future. This increase was adjusted for the additional revenue projected in the water fund that we saw earlier. And it takes into consideration the delay in the water tank replacement and the deferral of the current year's water main replacement program. And we'll talk about those items in more detail when we get to the CIP report. Sewer rates are being increased 5% to prepare to meet the cost of mandates that are being pushed out through MWRD. There's $3.4 million in scheduled sewer related infrastructure improvements over the next 10 years. Nikki already touched on this one. The general collection service fee is proposed to increase by 5%. This increase is consistent with the tax extension, limited version of the 12-month CIP that is used for the property tax levy. Burglar and fire false alarms, we are proposing to increase the fees slightly related to false alarms occurrences over 6. That detail can be found in your draft budget. Ambulance fees, resident and non-resident ambulance fees are proposed to increase to better reflect the cost increase of responding to emergency medical service calls. There are some building and other permit fees proposed to be increased, and these fees were last looked at and increased in 2019. Building permit revenue is a significant annual source, accounting for 7% of revenue to the general fund. The cost for third-party plan review and inspections have increased significantly by over 20% in costs over the last 3 years. This is leading to a proposal to increase this fee from $6.50 per square foot to $7.15 per square foot, or a 10% increase for a dwelling permit. Based on the survey results and actual costs related to other building and inspection activities, several minor adjustments have been recommended for street opening permits, re-inspection fees, sign permits with inspections and window signs, and new fees are proposed for large fence projects over 500 feet, and also a new fee for supplemental inspections.
Margaret, I have a quick question.
Yes.
During this year, we increased fees for people who will not get their projects done. Is that, and we get a lot of complaints about that. We got one, you know, the board got one last week. Is that in here?
So
I didn't see it.
No additional changes from when that last was updated by the board.
I didn't see it in the schedule. Is it in the long schedule? I just didn't, you know, it's there. I just missed it.
It's on
Okay.
page 64.
Okay.
Permit extension fees are 3 different.
Right in the middle of the page on 64.
I see it.
Section 9-10.
Okay, got it. Good.
Make this as large as.
So that's not a change. That's
Got it. Good.
And so the last item we're touching upon is the electric vehicle charging station. The cost to charge an electric vehicle in the new downtown charging station is currently 15 cents per kilowatt hour. After we reviewed data usage from the charging stations and also looking at our utility costs of having those charging stations, we're going to propose a dynamic price structure of 25 cents up to 50 cents. And this would be a reviewed and adjusted monthly based on the usage and based on what the utility is passing on as a charge to us. And last but not least, various Glencoe Golf Club rates are proposed to increase based on market data, which are listed in detail on page 61. And I believe they'll be discussed a little bit further on our presentation this evening. Do you have any other questions for me?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So basically, everything that's not coded in red stayed the same.
Correct, yes.
So I mean, what I wonder about, because I mean, some of the increases we're making, people are gonna feel, I mean, obviously, you know, they pay their water bills, sewer bills, things like that. And I think it's fine and we should increase that. But all the fees that we don't increase year after year in an inflationary environment means we're actually decreasing them. And when we thought of having any kind of automatic increase on any of these fees, because they're in effect decreases. You're paying the same thing that you paid in 2019 or 2018 or last year. And I just don't know, some of these fees are so small, you lose your, I don't know, your little village sticker, it's $2. I mean, with what you're gonna pay your customer service rep, $2 doesn't cost, you know, that doesn't cover it. And just with all the consultants that we need for permits and reviewing things for plan commission and things like that, you know, I think we're light on some of these and could think about increasing additional fees or having some sort of automatic annual increase in some of these.
And we have, I mean, part of our process is doing a survey of our surrounding communities too, because we do generally try to stay kind of in the pack. If the board feels differently about that, or the committee feels differently about that, and you're okay kind of being a little bit higher in the rank of things, we could increase some of those. We did look at like vehicle stickers, and a lot of these little fees were kind of comparable with our surrounding communities, which is why we didn't propose an increase. And we didn't really want to feel like we were nickel and diming. But we certainly could take a look at doing an annual adjustment on those items that would be tied to supporting the cost of the operation. And I think that's the tricky part too, is as a non-home rule unit, we have to be able to justify and reasonably tie the cost to anything that we charge on a fee basis.
Another aspect that I think is important for us at the staff level is we need to take another look at certain licensing fees, things like that, business license fees, adjusting the business license categories taking another look at liquor licensing, those types of things. That's an aspect of something that I'd like to try to do in the coming year. What we try to do, as Nikki and Margaret have said, is to stay to some degree in line with neighbors. I think that's a good way of doing it, and it's not always a good way of doing it because everybody creates their fee structure to accommodate what they needed to accommodate. And so that isn't always equalized across, but particularly when we looked at business or at building permit fees, for instance, that is an area where we certainly have seen our costs increase over time from the standpoint of outside consultants. But when we looked at where we stood within kind of the ranking, if you will, if you remember when we went through that several years ago, and we were kind of third on the North Shore in terms of the cost structure. Well, we stay in third place even with these modifications.
And we did raise.
We did, right. And we did do that because for both reasons, that others had been raising them and we hadn't, and that our costs were going up. I think to your point, what we also try to do is balance out where these increases are coming. I think, vehicle licenses was something that we were starting to review this year and made the determination that we didn't have enough data to justify necessarily pushing up those vehicle license costs. But that's an area that we may look to in the future because, to your point before, it is an area of cost to us. It's not a free program for us to administer. And I think a program like that has been something that we would like to see have a bit of an extended revenue stream, not just necessarily fully just covering that cost to produce that program. So long story short, your comment is very well taken. I don't know that we necessarily want to apply an indexing factor to everything. There are many fees in this fee structure that are never administered during the course of a year or two. That's the other kind of oddity. When we assembled everything, these used to all be in various locations throughout the municipal code. Back in 2014, we pulled them all together into one place so that we could look at them every year kind of comprehensively. But I think that's something that we can continue to do during the course of this year. Like I said, business license, liquor licensing, those types of fee structures, we definitely want to keep looking at as well.
All right. And then one other question. So the Glencoe Golf Club rates that are here, are those the current ones? Because I know you were raising them and I don't see them in here. And I just wasn't sure if this was the current list.
It is.
We're talking, I mean, I didn't go through all the ones, but I know you got rid of some early bird thing and it looks like
There's just one fee that is the correct current schedule. The top fee is the only one that was eliminated. And then you'll see that the top maybe like 8 are all increasing. And then only at the bottom, there's a few that are noted with a little notation that they are not increasing
I was
this year
looking
for
at
the bag
page
fees.
67.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe I'm looking at the wrong.
That may not have been, yeah.
It does not have a red markup.
No. So the Glencoe Golf
61.
Club rates-
Everything was increased except for.
No, I thought they
Yeah.
were, and I was just.
You're right. They're accurate on page 67, but they should be read.
Okay.
Red
Should
line.
update on 67.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll update that.
Okay.
They're correct on page 61. Gail, if you look at that.
Yeah, no, I noticed.
Yeah, we'll fix that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I make a philosophical comment? Especially, based on my experience in California and Arizona, the movement in that part of the country with a less reliance on the property tax is fee for service. And I see that in our future in a big way.
And if we ever run short, all we have to do is start assessing the fines for all the kids not wearing their bike.
Yes.
My kids will balance the budget on my.
I think it's free. So there you go.
That's all. That's all fine.
No, it's good. I think
If
we're,
somebody gets hurt,
No.
yeah, maybe we should actually do that. Like I said, once somebody's kid gets hurt, we're gonna have some explaining to do.
I have an I would just say that that sounds popular perhaps around this table. It is much less popular in action.
I get it. Yeah, but I would actually be willing to take the heat on that. As somebody who 2 years ago, before I got this job, had a bicycle crash, and I would not be here if I wasn't wearing a helmet. Period. Full stop.
I think generally where we've tried to focus is where we're seeing the most increase in costs is the infrastructure, the water, the sewer. Easy to justify the building permits because we are seeing that consultant.
And by the way, I don't think we want to just index. I think that's, I think we want to show our residents that we're looking to see where we're cooking. But I would be willing to start finding people if kids aren't wearing helmets, they should be wearing helmets. And most kids, if they're, they know they have to do it, they'll do it.
Right around the
Okay. Any other questions or comments on fee or fines? Okay. Okay, so we're going to move into the department budget section. Starts on page 82 tab. Going to start with the finance department. And over to Margaret.
So the finance department's calendar year 2023 budget request includes just over $1.7 million in expenditures. The finance department is divided into two divisions. So we have administration and risk management. So I'm going to go over some key points of our budget that are listed here on our slide this evening. The budget as presented is an overall increase of approximately $171,000 or 10.8% from calendar year 2022 budget. The increase is largely attributable to the increase in personnel costs of approximately $37,000 and also $185,000 budget amount of loan forgiveness from the general fund to the golf course fund. We also have included a request for $7,500 to purchase an alarm billing software that would help assist and streamline the tracking of false alarm incidents and alarm permit renewals. This increase of the budget is partially offset by the decrease for grant consulting services. We reduced that from $100,000 in calendar year 2022 to a budget of $15,000 for calendar year 2023. It's anticipated that these resources may provide additional financial support for our existing 10-year community investment program. And we also have some other contractual services in the finance budget related to professional audit services, banking services, and actuarial costs. The finance department currently has 6 full-time employees, and this draft budget proposes no changes to full-time personnel. Another highlighted request from the calendar year 2023 budget includes the village's projected IRMA premium of $302,000 for general liability, property casualty, public officials liability, cyber liability, and workman's compensation claims. The estimate is inclusive of the village's existing coverage level, and it also includes the deductible of $50,000 per claim. Pursuant to direction from the Finance Committee earlier this year, there's also a budgeted $250,000 drawdown of the village's IRMA reserve to offset this cost of the premium. The budget continues to support the initiative of investing in staff engagement and education, including leadership training and continued education in the areas of payroll, procurement, accounting, and financial reporting. In calendar year 2022, the Finance Department had a number of accomplishments. The village obtained the Triple Crown Award from the Governmental Finance Officers Association, certifying that the village's financial reports were created at the highest standard possible for the calendar year of 2022. Staff also accomplished configuring and implementing our new payroll software as part of the village-wide ERP system implementation. We completed a request for proposal for professional audit services and banking services, and those items will be presented before the board this Thursday at the board meeting. The finance staff coordinated with the village manager's office to identify a professional resource to obtain grant funding. That was completed, and we're working with the consultant to identify eligible projects for grant funding. And they're actively monitoring grant opportunities that match village projects specifically. There's many other accomplishments listed in the budget book if you'd like to review more of them. And our major work plan items for 2023 include completing a $4.3 million alternate revenue bond issue to work with the village's financial advisor to reaffirm the village's AAA credit rating, as mentioned earlier. In coordination with the village manager's office and the Glencoe Golf Club, work to develop materials supporting the calendar year 2024 referendum question to borrow for the Glencoe Golf Club improvements. It's also something on our work plan. We continue to maintain the village's highest standard possible for the village's annual budget document, annual financial report, and popular annual financial report, which is the PAFR. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Margaret. Okay, so we're moving to the public safety budget.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'd like to walk you through some highlights of the Public Safety Department budget for calendar year 2023.
This begins on page 92, if anyone's following along.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to start on page 94. Our total budget for this year is about $11.2 million. It's up about 8% from last year. And again, most of those increased costs are due to increased costs for goods and services related to COVID-19 and supply chain issues, increased law enforcement training and equipment mandates for public safety, and an increase in personnel costs due to overtime related to staff turnover and shortages, which I'll talk about in a little while. We also anticipate large expenditures for state mandated body worn cameras, as the manager mentioned earlier. Additional vehicle replacements due to supply chain and production disruptions this year. Building and facility upgrades here in our building and some equipment replacement in 2023. Our personnel costs reflect the need to fill open positions to maintain our authorized strength. Some overtime coverage to fill for open positions, as well as the training required for new and veteran officers. Also on page 94 at the bottom of the page, you'll see that our personnel costs are $9.2 million out of a $11.2 million budget. That's 80 to 85% of our budget is personnel costs. So that's a big focus on our budget every year. The next item up on the screen for you is contractual services. These are things that you can see, they're not delineated by line item, but on page 108 in section 500 contractual services in our budget, they're kind of delineated in a couple line items. These are programs that are cost effective for us every year, year in and year out. There are multi-year agreements that we've had or relationships that we've had. They save us money every year. They provide excellent services that would cost much, much more if we did it with staff on our department. So these contractual services, while every year they go up a little bit, they still save us money over the long run. Family Service to Glencoe, we've had an agreement with them for over 20 years. We're presently negotiating for next year. We just ended a 3-year contract with them. Dispatch services, as you all know, we've been doing that since 2017. This is the final year of our contract. So in the middle of calendar year 2023, we'll be renegotiating that with them. And again, I see you shaking your head, but it is still an immense cost savings for us. Village of Winnetka fire inspections, we've been using them for the last 3 years. They again save us a lot of money just based on training alone. To be a certified fire inspector in Illinois takes hours and hours of training that you have to recertify every year. So it's a recurring cost that we don't have to bear. We just pay them a fee to do the services for us. And of course, our crossing guard contract, we've had that in place since 2017. And again, that saves us from using in-house staff or reallocating community service officers or police officers to help us do that. So again, all these things are cost saving things for us. So we're going to continue to do that. I'm going to take you back to page 94 under personnel. As the village manager mentioned earlier, we're down 9 positions in our public safety rank. In 2022 alone, we had 3 officers retired. We balanced that with, we hired 3 officers in 2022 as well. And we also have a couple more lateral candidates that we're waiting on. Hopefully by the end of this year, early next year, we might have in the pipeline to hire as well. And I know I've talked about it in the past, hiring lateral applicants saves us the learning curve time. When we hire someone, who's a lateral, they're already a certified police officer in Illinois, so we could put them right to work. So we don't have to spend 6 months in the academy and then another 3 to 4 months in field training. So it helps us get them on board and ready to go to fill an actual position much quicker than we can with entry levels. The reality is with entry levels right now, they're few and far between. This is not a Glencoe problem. This is a national problem where people are not interested in becoming police officers right now. So lateral entry is really the key to trying to get these positions filled as quickly as we can. So we continue to do that.
We budget for fully staffed public safety. or-
We did. Our goal is always to get back to 36. As the village manager said, I'd love to do that this year. It'll probably take us 2 to 3 years.
We had conversations as we were building out the budget as to whether or not we should maintain full allocation for all 36 officers in the budget or not, given the fact that it may be a while. And it was our recommendation ultimately to maintain that funding so that we don't have to find it again in the future. That it remains our priority. And my hope is that we fill all those positions in 2023.
Next month and a half.
That's right. That'd be fine.
And another aspect of our personnel shortages is our paramedic numbers. I know I've talked about that with the group again too. This year, we've done a couple different things. We've hired some paid on-call firefighter paramedics. We have 2 of them presently. And again, that allows us to bring in experienced paramedics from other fire departments to come and work for us to help us fill some of our shortages. And that's worked out very well for us. That's another area where I'd like to spend some time in 2023 to try to get a few more of those on board as well. That just helps us fill some blanks while we're getting people trained. In 2022, we sent 4 of our sworn officers to paramedic school. As you know, that's a big commitment. It's 9 months of training at least, sometimes longer, depending on how many calls and when they get their allotment of training skills and things like that before they can even take their tests. So that's something we're going to continue in 2023, but that is also a big part of our personnel issues that we're facing right now. The next item on the board is CIP. I think we'll get into details later, but in general, on page 97, as you can see, we are scheduled to spend almost $700,000 in community investment program initiatives this year. And like I said, when we talk about the CIP later on, I can get into more details, but one thing I wanted to point out right now is vehicle replacement. It's been very difficult. As you know, this year, we placed our orders for squad cars this year in January. In October, we were advised that production ended with no notice. We are scrambling to get cars ordered for calendar year 2023, and our vendors, meaning General Motors and Ford, haven't committed to doing any production in 2023 at all. They're taking orders right now, at least Ford is, Chevrolet is not. They're not even sure that they're going to continue with the Tahoe model for law enforcement. So we have orders on the books like we did last year. Like the village manager said, we ordered 6 cars, just hoping that we can get 2 or 3 of them out of that order. We did 2 different dealers through the cooperative purchasing. So we're trying to spread our luck as best we can. So that's something that's going to play out as the year goes on as well. As the year goes on, my guess would be that we might be coming back to you, because if we are able to get cars, I have a feeling that the money we allotted may not be enough, because it's going to be highly competitive with limited numbers. And I'm not an accountant, but that usually means higher prices for us.
So when you place an order, there's no deposit or commitment? Or
There's nothing. It's
financial?
basically an agreement that, okay, thank you for ordering cars from us. We'll let you know when they're ready. And in the past, that's never been an issue. This year is. And that's going to continue for years to come.
Where it becomes a bit of a challenge is if vehicles are not performing well, the vehicles that we have in the fleet. And so that it thus far, one of the 4 that are listed in this budget, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, has not been reliable. And thankfully, the other 3 remain reliable for now, but that is going to become the other challenge, is that if things start to break down and we're taking vehicles out of service for extended periods of time, because in some cases, even the manufacturers trained service technicians aren't capable of finding the problem. So it just adds another layer of complexity overall to this unique situation. And it may force us to try some things that we haven't tried. Oh, go ahead.
And one of the other things that we're looking at, trying to examine all opportunities. There is a branch of Enterprise Rent-A-Car that serves governmental agencies. It's not just leasing arrangements, they also do purchasing. Because they have nationwide reach, they also have more buying power than we do as the Village of Glencoe. So they are examining our fleet. They are running into the same problems with public safety vehicles as we are. But they do have the ability sometimes to find similar vehicles on lots elsewhere in the country that we might not have access to. So that's another avenue that we're starting to explore to see if that's an opportunity to get additional vehicles. And that also is true for public works as well. Some of the specialty vehicles like a sewer vac, we're not going to find that in a lot in Ohio, but some of the more common vehicles we might be able to obtain through them as well.
And then the last item for strategic plan initiatives, training and professional development is always key to our budget. We're always investing in training our personnel, especially because we're the public safety model. They have to be certified with police, fire, and EMS. So with all the work stoppages and slowdowns, some of our training, some of our extra training has had to take a back seat. We're still going to focus on basic training for entry-level officers, certification training for our existing officers, and paramedic training officers. So that's something that we're going to continue with, as we get staff on board, depending on what their needs are, as well as our existing staff. So training will be also something that we spend a lot of time and money on this year as well. Be happy to answer any questions, and before we talk about that, thank you.
Right along, that works.
Good. Good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here tonight to present the calendar year 23 budget for the Public Works Department. Public Works has a hand in 4 different funds within the budget document before you. And before I dive into that, I do want to take a minute to introduce. I've got with me tonight Water Plant Superintendent Alex Urbanchik and General Superintendent Don Kirk, who in many circles are also known as Genius Superintendents. Also have behind me our Public Works Analyst Jeff Maudsley and our Development Services Manager Taylor Baxter. And these 4 individuals played a big role in helping to prepare and develop the budget document that's before you tonight on behalf of the Public Works Department. Public Works is made up of 50 full-time employees that are in both administrative and professional divisions as well as operational. The Public Works General Fund budget starts on page 109. Thank you, Director Larson. Budget document. And includes funds necessary to maintain routine expenditures in all our operational divisions, which the traditional sewer, forestry, municipal buildings, community development, municipal garage, streets, and street lighting. The calendar 23 budget request includes slightly more than 7.1 million in expenditures, which is a slight increase, 2.4% increase from last year, due primarily to requested personnel and contractual service costs. So diving into that a little bit, the contractual services includes our third-party agreements with HR Green for plan review and building inspection services, and also agreements with Tesca Associates that who's the village planning consultant who also provides ancillary services to us in the area of our tree preservation ordinance enforcement for development. And then we've got smaller agreements on fire sprinkler, residential fire sprinkler systems, elevators, and health inspections. And the building division services that oversee these contractual services are designed, as we talked a little bit earlier with our fee and fine recommendations. They're designed to largely recover the fees for these services through our permit fees. Moving on to personnel, we've got There is one new position in the Public Works General Fund budget this year. That's a position for a facility manager. This is new and would have responsibility for planning and carrying out ongoing maintenance needs and the collective capital improvements at 4 major village facilities totaling over 100,000 square feet of space, and that includes the village hall, the public works garage, both the admin and the garage structure, our water tower site, which is out on Frontage Road. We've got facilities out there west of the Edens, as well as the train station, and also grouped in there would be the water plant, although the water plant superintendent largely handles that role for that facility. Our historical practice for the duties and responsibilities of this position have been by committee, and that has proven to no longer be effective in staff's view, and became glaringly apparent during our budget preparation this year in the development of this year's budget, which includes significant needs, both infrastructure needs, both across the street at the garage and here in the village hall. We feel this position is more than justified, and what we would have no difficulty in filling out. This is probably a position and a half of responsibility, but we're going into it with the idea we can build. This position will report directly to the Public Works General Superintendent, but will also be accessible to every department and every department head. And again, the duties and responsibilities will range from hands-on repairs, as well as overseeing the many routine, annual, and special projects that more than we could even count in the budget that happen on an annual basis. And again, this year in particular, as we'll talk in the CIP review, is a particularly heavy lift for our municipal facilities. Also, within the personnel budget in the Public Works General Fund budget is our public work trainees. And just a little bit of historical background. We have historically hired seasonals or short-term laborers in the Public Works division. They are kind of essential manual labor positions that support work in all of our Public Works operational divisions. These positions have evolved over time, the way that we use them to meet our needs. And these are seasonal positions that essentially work 40-hour weeks with no benefits. That has become, in recent times, a closer look at that. Our determination under the Affordable Care Act is that these positions are eligible for health insurance benefits, and an allocation is included in this budget for these benefits for six budgeted positions. That's kind of been our a number that we've run with for probably a decade, although it's difficult to keep 6 positions filled continually. It's also been an excellent feeder program for full-time hires. I would say the majority of our recent full-time maintenance equipment operator hires have come out of that pool, which makes a lot of sense. We also kind of rebranded that as a Public Works trainee position in the last year, because we're up against it in the recruiting market, as to a lesser extent than other departments, but we're still up against it when it's when supermarkets are paying $16-17 an hour for laborers. We've had to not only increase our wage, but look at ways to make the positions more attractive. And so the trainee position is designed to be able to set people on a course, individuals on a course where they could see a potential long-term future in a public works position, whether here or elsewhere. And so far the response on that has been good. It's really important to us to be able to retain 6 individuals year round, because again, these are important manual labor positions. Additionally, in the Public Works General Fund budget are are some CIP items, vehicle and equipment replacement that we'll talk in more detail when we get to the community investment program portion of our presentation, as well as the aforementioned Safe Routes to Schools program that we fully expect to see completed in 2023. And then some streetscape upgrades, improvements in the downtown area, as well as a couple of roof replacements that would fall under that, the improvements to our village campus municipal buildings. Additionally, under our strategic plan initiatives, 2 items to make note of in particular is this budget also includes funds for the continuation into the second year of the comprehensive plan update that the Plan Commission is undertaking under the direction and leadership of not only our Tuska associates, but our staff lead on that is Taylor Baxter, as well as you see the ERP implementation line item. We are in the final stages of that program's implementation, which includes the community development module, which we're deep in the throes right now of implementation and preparation for going live, and that'll move our permitting and our licensing processes to a more automated program that we think is going to be a great great gain in efficiency and accuracy and a time saver as well for staff. And so we're anxious to see that through to implementation in 2023. So that's kind of a high level overview. I'm happy to answer any questions on the Public Works Department.
Question. The facilities manager, I would hope that he's some time available for him to be concerned about sustainability in the world of operations and maintenance, and might be able not only to save us some money, but help us in our sustainability efforts.
Certainly, I think we'll look at there are many programs that come through on building system operations where there are green options that we try to take advantage of those, but we're going to. I mean, this person we also had conversations. This is a lot to throw on the shoulders of one individual, and so this will have support of this individual through our general superintendent, our admin staff, and the director's role as well. But absolutely, that'll be part of that. It'll be on the.
It would be great if we could not either find somebody or train somebody for LEED certification and operations and maintenance called LEED O&M. But I think that's a way to demonstrate to us and the community our commitment to sustainability. Terrific.
Are we likely hiring from within for this position?
Likely not, no. This is going to be this will be a position that is not, it's not purely administrative. It'll be at times a strap on a tool belt and take care of minor technical maintenance. But at this time, we don't believe we've got that skill set in-house.
It's probably not part of this person's potential responsibility, but thinking of the Public Works building, and if we ever choose to try to redevelop that area, how they can move and how to change how we function entirely. That might be more than they would be, more than what you're thinking, but just
I think
even provide some input.
I think, well, depending on time served in that position, they might be able to be an asset with that, particularly if there's systems that might be transferred and used at a different site. But beyond that, I think the planning stage of that is probably at a higher level.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? Can you just quickly review now, how does this currently work? So if there's an issue with Village Hall, there's a flood in the basement, if there's an issue with the police with something with the roof, how is that responsibility allocated right now? Is it on a building by building basis, or I understand we're consolidating it, but how does it work now?
That's a very good question. At times, you'll see the very very incomplete individuals that will come forward, and that generally will fall on the Public Works Department, whether it's the director, the general superintendent, to at least triage and troubleshoot what the problem is. We've all had to become, as an example, we've become HVAC amateurs as far as managing the system of this building. Not ideal. And so when I say by committee, it is pretty much and public safety and other departments will look to Public Works for anything and everything related to the building, both here and across the street. And that also taxes, if we bring labor in, oftentimes we'll pull Public Works operational staff off the street to be over here assisting with things with this building, and it shorts us for other duties and responsibilities out in the field. So
I think another aspect of it that is a challenge is the long-range planning or even the scheduling of specific types of maintenance, specific areas of need, or even contemplating what those might be. We'll get into that a bit in the CIP, but it really came to light this year as we started to look at a series of needs within the Village Hall as a specific example, some of which seemed brand new, even though they weren't, because they had been to some degree managed by an individual or someone was aware of it, but it hadn't been communicated between departments or between the manager's office and the departments. So I think part of the problem is that this isn't anyone's job right now. It's a lot of people's jobs. And that means it often gets pushed to the back burner. And when we have, as Dave said, 100,000 square feet of really operational space that has to function 24 hours a day, 365 days a year in some cases, it isn't a good means of managing this component of our infrastructure. If the Village Hall is not functional, and there have been times where it's less functional than it should be, our staff doesn't perform as well, particularly in the public safety side of the building. And so I think that's another area where we want to be more proactive. We want to be more thoughtful. We want to be more measured in how we move forward. And to Trustee Vree's question before, I do think this individual has a role, particularly if we do make decisions that may lead to a relocation away from the building that's across the street from here, in how that building is maintained to get us to that point. These things don't happen overnight. There's a process. And sometimes, as we've gotten quite good, it requires a little bit of duct taping together. But doing that in a with more methodology, I think is going to serve the organization much more effectively than it has been lately.
And if I could add one comment, we've been tracking the hours over the last 5 years. It's about 2,200 hours a year of staff time that's dedicated to taking care of facilities. So as you can see, that's really a full-time position, 2008.
Village managers section of the budget starts on page 127. And the village manager's office budget request includes just over 2.7 million in expenditures for calendar year 2023, which represents an overall increase of 178,000 or 7% from calendar year 2022. A large portion of that is attributable to the addition of a full-time staff member, which we'll touch on in just a moment. As you'll see kind of on the breakdown on the slide here, a large portion of the village manager office budget is spent on contractual services. The highlights within that include the village's corporation council. That's the cost we spent with Elrod Friedman, as well as the village's labor council. All of the village's legal services are consolidated here in the village manager office section of the budget. Personnel, again, that customer service representative is the change here year over year, a new position that staff is proposing. And this is proposed to be a true first line customer service person that would serve here at Village Hall in person, over the phone, over email. And this position would be structured within the village manager's office but would certainly have and support all aspects of the village's operations, especially those at Village Hall, including public works and finance. Somebody that could kind of be trained in all those positions. Previously, a lot of those first line customer service needs were served by the receptionist cashier that was in the Public Works Department. That was Parisa Kirkman. When she retired earlier this year, that position was backfilled with a new position in Public Works, the permit coordinator, who was hired to also have more responsibilities helping the Development Services Department. And so this position that we're proposing now would help to allocate more resources to those customer service needs that still exist, and have somebody that's truly dedicated there at the front counter to that purpose. So again, centralize some of that customer service needs, which right now the village doesn't have somebody that has some of those basic responsibilities across all departments, can do some of the basic finance, public works, and village manager's office needs from the front counter there.
I have a question. So I noticed as I was walking in, it says Village Hall, is open 9 to 12, 1 to 4, or whatever. So with this position, are you planning on not closing for lunch?
Yeah, I think we're gonna go back to kind of pre-pandemic times. It has been a benefit overall for the organization, but it was more important, particularly when we were in a partial in, partial out structure. I will say it's been nice to be able to provide an hour where we don't have to find coverage for the front counter, particularly during that time. But I think given the fact that we will have a person who's kind of dedicated to that area, it would only make sense that we kind of go back to being open for those regular hours 5 days a week.
Yeah, because customer service, that's like
Yep.
probably prime time.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah.
And just to piggyback on Mr. Pape's comment, from the public works side, the building division side, we think this is a critical addition because the backfilled permit coordinator role is intended to be able to provide better support. There's a trickle down effect where, we had a question, a comment last month on permit turnaround time and response time. And it's been hampered because we've got a very heavy lift right now with the number of responsibilities that are put on the building division and pulling somebody back from that front counter that can assist. And then the relief that'll provide both to the planner and to the development services manager will be significant. And so we think this is an important step to take within the village organization.
Yeah, the public works staff will still help to support this position, obviously, when that individual's out of the office or on lunch to make those hours all work. But overall would hope to be somebody that has to much less often transfer customers either in person or on the phone to other members of the village staff and can handle, most of the most common needs, which we feel is most consistent with the organization's approach to customer service. Moving on to some of the CIP highlights of the items that are included in the village manager's section of the budget. We'll discuss these again later in the presentation, but the council chamber upgrades, the 2023 request includes dollars to assist with the redesign and project planning phases for this project. We anticipate that the execution of it will happen in calendar year 2024. Village Hall space needs analysis to help consider future physical space renovations at Village Hall. And as a few other staff members has already mentioned, the ERP implementation, which is anticipated to conclude in 2023. And so there's some dollars budgeted for the costs associated with the final project closeout for that project. Strategic plan initiatives, again, as part of our ongoing commitment to staff development, there's dollars allocated to training and professional development. The ERP implementation, we anticipate closing out in 2023. And then some legal counsel dollars for special projects. That's intended to be a comprehensive review of the village code, some of the village ordinances and regulations, which we hope will take us to finding some spaces that we can modernize the village code, which is in some places out of date and in need of some more modern language and to be better built for today's environment. The last note here is the community grants program, which again, we will discuss in further detail later in the presentation. But the note here is that the community grants committee has recommended to meet the requests totaling $143,500. Those dollars are sufficiently budgeted for within the village manager's section of the budget. And we'd be happy to take any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That has its own tab right after the department details.
Page 145. This year's budget is reflective of our rate increases in all of the categories. It's one of the highest revenue budgets that I've ever presented. Contractual services, our food and beverage service is up for renewal next year. So we are ending a 2-year contract. That contract is over this week with our existing vendor. We've had an RFP out probably 3 months. Had one person interested in it that also operates other golf courses in the area. The existing vendor has indicated that they're gonna give us a proposal, which I have not received yet either. As we know, the condition of that building makes it really hard to sell. The only good thing is that the restaurant also this year had one of its best years revenue wise. We did reach or exceed our break point with them. So we're gonna end up with another $4,500 in exceeding the break point. So 27,000 this year for rental of the kitchen. It's pretty high. In comparison, Heritage Oaks, which just opened, got $25,000 for the operation of their kitchen. So I think we're doing pretty well in that contract. But that is a very important aspect of the golf course. People like to have a good customer service experience there. Beverage card, food and beverages is pretty important when we come out to the golf course. So I'll update you when we find out what's going on in that department. Personnel, there are no major changes expected. The assistant superintendent who was promoted last year is still working under Dave Arden, who is our genius superintendent. And it's going to be a long process. He's starting to take some educational courses for turf management, which is essential for this role. But he learns every single day from Dave. It is our hope that Mario will eventually move into this head superintendent position. Dave has not indicated when he is going to retire. So we don't have an end date from him, which is good for us. Expense wise, we do have an increase in expenses. Majority of it is, as everyone else has said, due to inflation, change issues, fuel, utilities, equipment, supplies for repairs is also something that's pretty high for us right now. Payroll, also another hot spot. We hire about 50 seasonal employees a year. Our retention rate in the golf division for maintenance is about 90%. Thankfully, we have the same individuals coming back. There is a very high demand for that talent. We have had some poachers come to the golf course from private clubs trying to steal our maintenance workers. It's that desperate. So we have to make sure that we are paying them the going rates, because without them, and we have a very small crew, we don't have a product. So that's key for me in retaining them. In the pro shop division, we have about a 20% retention rate. A lot of college kids. We don't hire too many high school kids, but it's usually college kids and people that are in the pro shop. These are frontline staff. This is our customer service. We have to, again, attract, train, and retain all of these people. We have a lot of retired individuals who are former CEOs. They're great. We have them in the pro shop, and I can't tell you that the talent that we have, they work 3 days a week, and they're doing it for the complimentary golf, and they want something to do. So it's really worked out very well. I can't tell you how many times I'm complimented on how good our staff is. And It's a very hard job. Matt Rod, our head pro, tries to attract people every year and bring them in. I mean, we've had so many people come in, interview, fill out the paperwork, and then they disappear. It's very common, it's become more common. So we are increasing our hourly pay to try to retain the staff in that regard. Talking a little bit about increases, we have increased every single line item except for the carts, because we realize that we're higher than anybody else. We also have a dynamic pricing model that we are able to institute, and with Winnetka being closed, if you're not aware, Winnetka Golf Course is going to be closed for the next 2 years. Their town is undergoing a stormwater management project. The golf course is going to be closed. It's going to reopen with millions of dollars in renovations as well. But until that time, we are definitely going to take advantage of the high demand that we're going to have for our golf club. So we'll have a dynamic pricing model in place, which is a range of pricing. It's all algorithms that's handled by our point of sale system. Kind of like when you buy an airline ticket, the demand is high and low. There is one category that I always am very sensitive to, and that's our senior membership category. It did have an increase because everything needs to increase, but they are a price sensitive category. They fill a lot of our soft spots. I take pride in being the lowest on the North Shore for our seniors, and I also hear that every day. And our participation rate is huge in the senior category. So there was just a nominal fee increase on that. Other kinds of CIP, we're going to go through later. Training and professional development, I already talked about with Mario, who we are developing to become our head superintendent at some point. That's kind of a overview. Any questions?
So the clubhouse, we go to referendum next year. Should we put something into the budget about it?
A placeholder? Well, I think we had the $15 million in for,
It
It's
is.
in the CIP.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
But in
It's not a
2020,
line item.
but it's in 2024. I do think to some degree, the question is, what will be expended in 2023 if the referendum passes? We do know that a pretty significant component is that we're going to have to bring on an architect, and an architectural services agreement would be likely the first step post a positive outcome of the referendum. I think it would likely be something where we would simply amend the budget at that point in time to include those resources. And then also outline a time frame for debt service, or excuse me, for debt issuance over the course of.
I don't remember what the turnaround is. It going to referendum and then when we issue the debt.
We could issue it.
Typically a 3-month
Yeah.
turnaround.
So the referendum's in April. We could be issuing in the summer. And that may very well be what we do. And that becomes the revenue to offset the new expenditure in the course of the year.
And
But
it
we
may
wouldn't
end
put
up-
that in the budget as,
We didn't include it, to some degree,
Presumptive.
right?
I mean, it doesn't have to pass, but it,
We could include it from a professional services standpoint, because we do, I mean, if we do issue debt next year, it would be we'd probably do a dual issue, one issue, a series for the alternate revenue bonds and a series for the golf club. And we do have expenditures associated with the alternate revenue bond, with the distinction of the referendum is not guaranteed to pass. But we do know that we would need professional services in the budget. So that is something that we could amend the draft budget and bring back to you in the final budget, an estimate of what we think we could include, what we would need in the first year.
and the last time we went for referendum bond, did we put it in the budget the year we did it or not? I mean, if it's not our practice to do so, then we shouldn't, but
We ended up amending the budget
I think we amended the budget. Yeah.
then we
for
should.
that same reason.
What
nervous.
kind of budget allocation do we have kind of related to the referendum? You know, in terms of, is the golf course planning any kind of expenditure? Because I'm sure they will
We,
spend.
I will say, from the standpoint of what the village has the authority to expend relative to a referendum question, we have more than sufficient resources in what we've already presented. We are very strictly limited
Right.
on how much we can expend. It's approximately $3,000 in total. And that has been a restriction that the village has been under anytime we have gone to referendum question, have placed a referendum question on a ballot. And it's essentially state statute. So I think we're fine from that standpoint. If there are outside groups that do so, that wouldn't be reflected in our budget.
So, okay, so the Friends would be
Right.
completely separate.
Mhm.
Okay.
And just to follow up, it's probably not realistic to expect, should the referendum pass, that any construction would take place this fiscal.
Absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely not. I think we would most likely be looking at a 2024 construction start schedule. And even within 2024, we want to make sure that we aligned it with the golf season appropriately so that it wasn't overly impactful to the high points of the season. But that's something that we would be looking at. And again, becomes important once we have an architect on board.
The water fund, which also has its own tab.
Right, you'll find that tab on, beginning on page 155 in your budget booklet. The calendar 23 budget request in the water fund includes over $5.8 million in expenditures, which is nearly a 19% increase from calendar 22. And that's due largely to increased capital expenditures. And we'll talk about that in a moment. No personnel changes included in the budget within the water fund. As you know, the village owns and operates a vintage water treatment plant down at the lakefront that we've maintained carefully for nearly 100 years.
It's a good vintage, though.
Right.
It's a good vintage.
Under the CIP, just to touch on this, we'll again cover a couple of these projects in more detail with our overview on the community investment program. But two projects I want to at least highlight in this fund are the lead service water line replacement and the 16-inch water valve replacement projects. As the board knows, we've had several discussions over the last 12 months on the status of the EPA's mandate to replace all existing lead water service lines in the village. That amounts to over the next 15 years, so by 2042. So included in this 23 budget is initial funding for a cost sharing program to create a financial incentive to replace existing lead water service lines. Staff expects to return to the village board in the next few months to finalize a policy before it's pushed out to the community. We're happy to talk about, so we've got a placeholder of $250,000 in the calendar year 23 project for that purpose. The 16-inch water valve replacement is a new entry in our CIP, and that was through an active valve exercising program, which is something we'd hoped to do over many years, but really only has come to fruition in the last couple of years. And that's a process where we systematically are operating all the valves in the distribution system in an organized way over the course of multiple years. Through that process, we've determined that several of the valves on our 16-inch water transmission mains are marginal or non-functional, marginally functional or non-functional. And that creates great concern in the event of a system disruption on those. Those are the main trunk lines of our distribution system, not being able to shut those down in a timely way creates all kinds of issues with system pressure. And as we've experienced one time in the last 20 years, those are the kind of disruptions that create system-wide mandatory boil orders to the community, which is not something we want to deal with. So we've identified probably 12 valves that need to be replaced, and these are not try as we might, these are not valves that are easily done in-house, and so these would be contracted. And so what we've allocated in the 23 budget is dollars for the first phase to replace six of these valves. To further the fun with these, many of these are located through the heart of the downtown business district or in tricky locations. So that's going to have to be very carefully coordinated. And so this would be a first step of a multi-phase project to replace these valves. Also in the CIP, and we'll talk a little bit in more detail, is the Bluff Crib Wall project that the village manager referenced earlier with respect to grant funding. This project carried over from calendar year 2022, and it is intended to address slope stability issues both above and below the critical access ramp between the Park District's halfway house and the water plant gate. This project will be a joint effort between the village and the Park District. Serves both. I mean, it's the essential access point into the plant for all essential commodities that are part of the treatment process. And it's also, the primary access down to the boating and swimming beach. So both agencies have considerable interest in seeing this project through. And it will be partially funded with a $700,000 state grant through a DCEO grant that has a timeline to it. So this will be the Park District this month is already considering engineering agreement to move this up so that we can presumably be ready to have this project bid out early in 2023. We need to rush the phase that's the grant funded portion to get that done before the state's fiscal year ends in June. So that'll be a fast track, that phase of it. But this improvement will be felt by many who travel that area, both for our operational needs and the public. But needless to say, we're going to work closely with the Park District to communicate that out to the community. And so it's a big lift, but we've got the right people involved and including the design engineer. And then from a vehicle replacement, we'll talk about that in our CIP overview, but there's a critical service vehicle used daily by the water distribution crew for routine and emergency work that is scheduled for replacement, and those funds are budgeted in this 2023 budget. From a strategic plan standpoint, ongoing training and professional development, our operators are all licensed through the state, and they have annual requirements to maintain those license certifications as well. So, and with that, that's a kind of a quick overview of the water fund. Happy to answer any questions.
Motor fuel tax fund also has its own tab.
Yeah, motor fuel tax or MFT you'll find in the budget booklet beginning on page 168. And that includes a little bit over $650,000 of expenditures in calendar year 2023, slightly less than last year. The largest portion of which is $550,000 that'll be combined with bond funds for the second year of maintenance street resurfacing improvements. If you recall, those improvements were planned to be phased over 2 years for a couple of reasons, both for staff's ability to manage that. That's a large lift, that kind of improvement, as well as impact to the community. We'd have anarchy if we were trying to do all the streets in a single year. And so the plan is to mirror a similar sized program as we completed here in 2022. And then also we've got a carryover project. That's our traffic signal control improvements, which we have vowed to complete this year without fail. It was deferred primarily due to just equipment procurement delays that as we got late in the year, it was going to be obvious that we weren't going to be able to receive those components in time. So it's simply rolled over. We hope this will be a project completed early in 23. And it's a safety upgrade to existing traffic signal controllers along Green Bay Road. Questions on MFT?
And if I can just add, in the MFT fund, we are projecting $241,000 in revenue next year. About $214,000 of that will come through the state through our share of their motor fuel tax. And then we are generating just over $22,000 from our local fuel tax as well. So it's a small amount, but it is something that's going into our road program. Into the debt service fund. So this starts on 73. Our debt service fund is where all of our property taxes related to our general obligation bonds are deposited, and then we pay debt service into installments. So June is typically when we pay an interest-only payment on our bonds, and then in December, we pay our principal and interest second installment for the year. Also, why it's so critical that we get property tax revenue on time, or relatively on time. The debt service fund pays for all outstanding GO bonds that are not water related. So that includes Series 2015A, 2016B, 2019 limited tax issue that we funded the Tudor Court improvements with, 2020A refunding, and then also our most recent installment, those 2021 referendum bonds. The total budget is $2,397,650. Compared to last year, that is a slight decrease, and that's really nothing we did other than that's just the structure of our outstanding debt. So the good news is that line item you'll see on Thursday evening when we present the property tax levy, that line item of the tax levy will actually go down. As of December 31st, our debt limit is $69.5 million. That's the maximum amount the village could borrow. We're certainly not proposing anything near that. Our total outstanding debt, if as we pay down everything in December, will be $21.3 million. The average payment of the debt fund over the life of the outstanding debt that we have today ranges from 1.2 million to 2.3 million per year. We do try and slot any new GO issuances and structure them to try and maintain a somewhat level debt payment. That will minimize the disruption to our property taxpayers as well and kind of eliminate any of those large increases. Obviously, in years that we have referendums, if we're issuing $10 million in bonds, there's really no way to avoid a sharp increase there. On the water side of things, just by comparison, we're paying about $180,000 a year in alternate revenue bonds and $180,000 on an outstanding IEPA loan. That's a loan that we've had in place for a long period of time, and we're paying virtually nothing in terms of interest on that. With the proposed issue of $4.3 million in alternate revenue bonds next year, will essentially double that debt payment that the water fund will have to sustain. So we'll go from essentially 360 for our existing debt, and then we'll double it. It does sound scary, but that is all factored into the water rate analysis of the infrastructure improvements that we're projecting going forward.
Quick question. Go back for a moment. The authority, without doing a referendum, is approximately 3.5 gross, of which we have outstanding as of the end of this year about $1,135,000. So I assume that's the net number, 2,003,000 and change is the number, or
The
is it
3.5 is the net number.
Oh, the 3.5 is net of that. Oh, okay.
Yes. So that is a good point. So we do still have limited taxing authority, and that's above and beyond what I had outlined earlier, and that can be used without referendum authority.
What's that number based on? The total.
The limited tax or the total?
Yeah, the 5 million.
That is based off of a calculation that was frozen, I think in the 80s. And it was, there's an allocation that the state decided each municipality got at that time period. And I think it was based off of EAV at the time.
At the time, yeah.
And then each year it's adjusted by like a CPI factor, but it's not the same factor as the property tax levy. It's usually a lower factor.
So it does go up a little bit.
It does go up a little bit each year.
And it's not based on anything really except inflation.
Correct.
Right.
And then that total amount that you're allocated is just reduced by whatever you have outstanding. So as we pay that 2019 debt issue down, that will also increase the number. More questions on debt service? Okay. Capital projects fund, which also has its own tab.
Calendar year 23 budget includes more than $3.1 million in expenditures for identified sanitary sewer, storm sewer, sidewalk, maintenance, street resurfacing, street lighting, and bike path improvements in the capital projects fund. 2023 is the second year in balance of funding from the first $7 million of GO bonds that were approved and issued in 2021. These projects should not be a surprise. A couple of them to highlight before we get to the community investment program overview would be two of the carryover improvements. The first is the Beach Road storm sewer outfall. This is an effort, we're again working kind of in partnership with the Park District to relocate and improve the storm sewer discharge at the end of Beach Road, which currently traverses through the center of what is the boating beach north of the water plant. And it's undersized, and so when we get a significant storm event, it tends to wash out right pretty much the center, a nice center cut right through the boating beach. So we looked at this project, budgeted for it this year. The scope is improved, increased a little bit, and we got late in the season and determined it would be best just to roll it over into the early part of 2023. This is a project we would hope to bring to the board with a project award early in the year and have the work completed before Memorial Day. And in conversations with the Park District, that'll be consistent with being out of the way before that season begins on the boating beach. And the second project included here is, I'm happy to report that the Green Bay Trail Hazel Crossing improvement will nearly be completed this month. There'll be some minor carryover into the spring, just due to long lead times on things like guardrail on top of the wall that'll be on both sides of the trail, handrails for the stairs that are being built. But the trail will be done and be open for use by early December. The reason this carries forward, this is a project that's largely 80% of the cost is covered by state grant funding. But we get invoiced, the village gets invoiced for our 20% share. We will not see that invoice till sometime late in 2023 based on the state's historical practice. Hence, we've rolled it into the budget more from an accounting standpoint. Project we're hopeful will be all completed by early in the spring of 23. And if you haven't had a chance yet, I would encourage you to walk or drive by and take a look. It's going to be a dramatic improvement, long overdue of what's been a kind of a pinch point in the Green Bay Trail for forever. We're already getting a lot of real positive feedback, anxious trail users ready for it to be open. And so that's a win to report. The other projects here, we'll overview those when we look at talk through the community investment program. But happy to answer any questions.
Lump the police and fire pension funds together. Again, these are largely controlled by statute, and it varies year by year dependent on retirement schedules as folks decide make that decision for themselves. All of our new public safety officers are enrolled in our police pension fund. The fire pension fund is not accepting any new entrants. We only have one remaining beneficiary, and that fund will continue to exist for the remainder of her life. The intention is to consolidate everyone into the police pension fund going forward. This year, we did complete the consolidation of the investments of the police pension fund in accordance with state statute. We were not required to transfer anything for our fire pension funds because we pay for that on a pay-as-you-go basis. So far, we're off to an interesting start with this market. We transferred about $39 million to them. They've lost about 8% so far, which all things considered is not awful in this investment market. We're hoping that those funds will recover sooner rather than later.
When was that transferred?
It was in May. So they were required to complete the transfers by June unless there is one outstanding lawsuit of a couple municipalities that are still fighting consolidation. Those are the only funds that are allowed to hold their own funds right now. Everyone else was required by statute to consolidate. So we're working with the consolidated board to get better investment reports. Those we'll share with the finance committee as we get them. So in total, our existing police pension fund supports approximately 36 active employees. We also have 50 members that are receiving benefits from this fund, made up of retirees, whether they're regular retirees, duty disability, non-duty disability, surviving spouses, and beneficiaries of former public safety officers. So that's 86 individuals total. And our required contribution this year is just over $2.6 million. We talked about this earlier, it's just about an 8% increase over last year. The fire pension fund, we round that budget to about $50,000, but that benefit is frozen. With tier 1 officers, the surviving spouse benefit does not change with cost of living. Interestingly, with tier 2, the surviving spouse benefits are increased by CPI. That's not to say that that won't change with statute at any time, but we are just planning for that benefit to stay the same over time. There's a component of the village's general fund levy that funds this benefit. So just by way of operation, each month when we make that benefit payment to that beneficiary, we transfer the money from the general fund and fund that. Reason being, we don't trust what would happen once the pension fund is liquidated upon the death of the last remaining beneficiary. We don't want to keep a lot of cash in that fund once that pension fund is closed down. So we cut it very close for that purpose. Are there any questions on the pension fund? Okay. All right, so before we get into capital, does anyone need a break?
5-10 minute break.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Almost.
Here we go.
Yeah.
All right, great. Host is not coming up.
Okay.
Fire away.
Okay, here we go.
Joe, we're starting again. You're listening.
CIP starts, it has its own tab, starts on page 189. So there's a brief overview. We mentioned earlier, so the entire community investment program goes over 10 years. And we're anticipating approximately 52.3 million in total infrastructure projects over the next 10 years. Turn to page 191, it's the nifty fold out section of your budget. This page and the page on the back of it, 192, lists every single project that we're anticipating over the next 10 years in detail and how much we're anticipating that to cost us. This little kind of gray purplish column in the center pulls up for each project, if it's a multi-year project, what the total cost for that project would be. And we did go through this year and make some adjustments in the out years for inflation, especially on our water main projects, to make sure that we're planning for those costs in the out years. If you flip over to the next nifty fold out page, this is the full financing plan. So we took all of the detailed projects over the next 10 years and we tried to determine how we're going to pay for them. It's all color coded. So those items, color coded blocks, so correspond with the appropriate funding source down below. So in that top section, each of these detailed projects have a corresponding category. There are only certain items that we can finance through a general obligation bond. Those items that we can't, or we typically haven't, such as vehicles funded through GO bonds, would all be funded through general fund reserves or using other revenue sources like sales taxes, income taxes, and so on. So just to give you an example, in the water main category, the orange shaded area, in 2023, the budget has 1.7 million in water replacements, 1.6 in 24, and 2.1 in 2025. That adds up to roughly 4.3 million in alternate revenue bonds. So that alternate revenue bond would fund improvements for the following 3 years. And that pattern repeats itself for each planned issue. When we look at the program as a whole, we're planning on issuing general obligation bonds in calendar year 2024. That will be the second installment of the 10 million that was authorized in 21, 2027 and 2030. So that note at the bottom of the page gives you the rough estimates of what we expect that to be. 3 million in 2024, and then 2027, that would be another referendum bond. Likely what we would do is go out to referendum for the 27 and the 2030 issue together. Then the note below that, the water alternate bonds we're planning for 23, 26, and 29. We space them out in 3-year increments because that's the maximum amount of time that we have to spend the bond proceeds once we issue the bonds.
So, yeah, I just have one question again. So in terms of where we're seeing these referendums, so kind of what are the years and kind of what are the amounts? I'm just thinking that of it in terms of, you know, the golf and what kind of ask
Right.
we're making.
So from the aggregate standpoint, the 2024 issue was already approved as part of the
So
21.
that is
So
enough.
that's already
So it'd be
done.
2027.
So it would likely just be approximately 10 million in 27, 10 or 11 million.
Uh-huh.
And that would be it. Because the
Oh,
rest.
In this 10-year window.
In this 10-year window.
Okay, so
Thank
we
you.
go with.
Yes.
the golf
Not for
course.
the end of time.
It's only the 10
If
years.
wishing made it so.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay, so if the golf course is next year, if that gets approved, and then the next one is not until 2027.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I.
Yeah, and then the water alternate bonds obviously doesn't require authority, but we do try and stagger that. The other thing that we take a look at when we're looking at debt financing is trying to keep bond issues in a single year under 10 million, that allows us to achieve what they call bank qualified status. And that allows us to get a lower interest rate. So we do try, it's not required that we keep it under 10 million, but we do try that. Try to keep it under there to get that interest rate. That's also another reason why we were talking about if the golf referendum is approved, it could be more beneficial for us to break that bond issue up over a couple years. Because we also have to, or more,
Yeah.
because we also have to keep in mind when we issue for water alternate revenue bonds or general obligation bonds or limited tax bonds, that all falls under that $10 million cap. So we have to be cautious of that, kind of keeping it all in mind.
Okay, but we can get the authority from the referendum at the
Right.
higher number and then just the issuance.
And then you have 5 years
Scale it
from the
out.
referendum date
Mhm.
to issue. You have to spend the
Yeah.
resources within 3.
Mhm. Okay,
I think we should put the golf clubhouse in.
Right now, it's just kind of.
But I mean, it's
spills
sitting out
over.
there as like other,
Yeah, it spills over on the
Right.
second page and it should be up.
We
Front
can,
and
we can move it up. I think again, we don't like to tempt fate too much and overly plan, and yet at the same time, I think understanding it in the context of the broader, to trustee listeners' point, understanding it within the context of the other bond issues that we anticipate, I think is an important change.
but it also, I mean, we sort of, I think, came to the point where we have to do something about the golf clubhouse. And so the plan right now is to go to referendum. If it doesn't happen, we still have to do something about the clubhouse.
Correct.
So it'll be something different, obviously, but I'd say even though it's still up in the air, right now, the plan is to go forward with $15 million.
We can update this. We can update this with no problem.
And I mean, it's a big number that's gonna jump out, but I think it's something that.
Roll that in.
One of the changes, and we kind of highlighted it briefly before as we were talking about the water rate, is we were anticipating when we talked last year that in, I believe it was 2026, we were going to be moving forward with the replacement and relocation of the elevated water tank. Given the work that we've done over the last 2 years and the work that's to be completed still this year in upgrading the entire 16-inch main from essentially Forest Way Drive all the way to the Edens Expressway, we've pushed that project out well into the future from the standpoint of our primary and most significant concern relative to that facility was the quality of the water main leading to it. With the water main replaced, that water tower, that tank is in excellent condition. It is old, but it's very, very well maintained. We anticipate that that will delay the necessity of moving forward with that project at least 10 years. So we've kept it in this 10-year window, but I anticipate that we'll likely push it further out as we build out the CIP over time. So I just want to make, that was a $5 million price tag. So those resources will get reinvested in the water fund. We haven't taken the resources out because we know we need those for distribution system improvements.
Is that a viable place for public works at one point?
It remains a viable
Still
place.
does,
for
even if
public-
we keep the water tower, you can put it underneath.
There's
So we got
sufficient.
a
Initial water?
2.5 acre site,
Oh, is it
Yeah.
bigger than I?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an odd
kind of
triangular,
pie shape.
it's an odd triangular shape.
Ours sits in a corner,
Yeah,
so it makes all the
Okay, so
other.
there's still plenty.
it widens out as it goes back.
Because I thought it was, if we were gonna move the tower, then we would have.
There was a study done by the village about 15, 16 years ago, Dave,
Yeah,
that anticipates the potential of a relocated public works garage to that site. And that's something we would want to dust off and make sure it's still relevant.
That's a small piece of property.
to your point, see actually on the backside of the financing plan, we have a couple projects out in limbo. The water plant upgrade might be a scary but optimistic placeholder for 2032. But that is something that will require additional discussion. So we really kind of lumped some of the larger projects that are going to require some extensive discussions of the village board on the backside, just so we don't lose sight of them, but that we do need to make sure that are addressed in future discussions. If you turn to page 195 in the budget, this is a detailed listing of every single capital project that is proposed this year. Some of the departments have kind of referenced some of the projects and highlighted some of them. The presentation breaks them out by funds. So what's on the screen right now are those projects that are proposed within the general fund. This is almost $1.5 million. This is all of these projects are going to be funded with the existing general fund reserve. So there's no borrowing associated with these. I'm going to pause on this slide. There are specific detailed narratives for every single project in this list. They start immediately following this list on page 197. Rather than us go through each one of these, I'm going to pause on the general fund and just ask if anyone has any questions about specific projects or how you'd like us to approach this, if there are any that you'd like us to review.
Yeah, we're happy to go through each of
Is this
them.
the last ERP one?
It is.
Yes.
And I think a lot of it will be completed this year. We're carrying over those dollars in the case that it isn't fully completed, but we are almost there. And again, we're happy to go through any of these in any detail that you wish. As Nikki said, we do provide pretty comprehensive write-ups for each of the projects that are proposed for the upcoming fiscal year, which probably answer a lot of questions, but may generate others. So
The other thing I would want to point out on this list is all of these building improvements, kind of starting with that roll call training room down. There is a combined narrative, we combine those all into one village hall renovation.
I'm not suggesting we, oh, go ahead, Gary.
No, I wanted to ask you to go back a point of the body cameras are, that's the smallest number involved in adding body cameras. Oh. Other than personnel costs, weren't there other additional capital expenditures for equipment programming, et cetera, to deal with it?
for body cams,
Yeah.
I think based on what, and Chief, you can answer that. I think based on what we know now,
Right.
we had anticipated more, but I think it's going to be a lower number in terms of the capital cost.
We do, because it's just gonna be squad car cameras and body cameras. That's really the only equipment. Everything else is cloud services, storage, things like that, and, personnel time to manage. This
So it's the personnel.
Do we not have cameras?
We don't have body cameras. We have squad car cameras. We've had them probably for 20 years. Yeah.
And then things that just carry over year after year, the safe routes to school. Would there ever come a point where, and I'm not suggesting we should, that if we just give up on the hope for the grant, that we would do it? Or is it totally contingent on getting the grant?
I think our hope and expectation is that this is going to be on the state's bid list this year, based off of what we have been told.
Early in
Early in 2023, which would be ideal, because we'd like to get these improvements in place before the school year starts in the fall. I think to answer your question, if they kick it again, I would say that we would want to move forward with these improvements. We've been waiting. There are certain ones particularly that are often brought up by the community. Dundee and Bluff is a good example. There is no signalized intersection from Vernon Avenue, which is a four-way stop, all the way to Forest Way. And yet Bluff is an area where kids cross. There is an improvement anticipated as part of this project. There are other rapid rectangular flashing beacon installations in other locations in the community that also warrant that improvement. South Avenue and Green Bay Road is a good
I
one.
take if it's sort of halfway done, because
that will come as a second phase after these safe routes to school improvements. But what we would anticipate at that location and at the crossing over here at Tudor Court would be to have a similar application.
And potentially others.
And others, yeah. Not Forest, Wesley and Green Bay has been another spot that's been recommended for that. But
And I would just note that number, we've increased it to accommodate the cost increases. Now, that's the
it's
full
been
cost.
5 years.
So we can,
Right.
we could proceed. That's the full cost. It's a reimbursement.
Yeah.
Grant, of which we would see 118,000 back from the state.
At one point, that was going to
It's
cover the whole
sometime,
thing.
yeah.
So what is, I'm just looking at the chart on 195, what is the, I think I know, but the new sidewalk on Dundee Road?
Well, the traditional remove and replace on residential is a component of the sidewalk replacement program this year, but we've also got dollars in there for identified gaps in the sidewalk system that were part of the active transportation plan that the board adopted. And on Dundee Road, that includes the 2-block section between Greenwood Avenue and Glencoe Drive to the east, where there was sidewalk only on one side.
Okay.
Questions of the general fund, okay. Keep moving down the line here. The water fund, this is approximately $2.5 million that would come from funding from the GEO bonds and water fund revenues. And the capital fund, just over $2.7 million, and that would all be the remainder of the referendum bonds that were issued in 2021. One thing I would point out here, in the water fund, the water main replacement includes some of the sections that were carried over, right, that were deferred from this year. So that is a little bit of a larger project than we've done in previous years. Happy to answer any questions or any specific on any of these projects as well. Final ones, motor fuel tax fund, we touched on that in detail. That's $650,000. This includes resources that were aggregated. Typically, what we've done in the past is allow those MFT funds to aggregate, and then we use it for larger street programs. And then the golf club fund, this is one that we haven't really touched on, but this is the protected netting. This was a carryover from previous year, the previous budget. This would come from golf fund reserves as well.
I think the one point to mention just real briefly relative to MFT is, you may recall, we received a bit of a windfall from the state of Illinois over the previous 3 years. Invested in Illinois resources. All of those were deposited into our MFT fund, and as Nikki said, aggregated. And so those will be exhausted, and we will not be getting any new Invest in Illinois resources out of at least that tranche. If the state does do another capital program, there may be resources available to us at that point, but it was about $600,000 if I remember.
Just shy.
Yeah. So not insignificant, and definitely helped.
On the golf club net, do we know, I mean, the price went way up. Do we know what's happening with the prices?
Well, we're still anticipating $1 million. There has not been a change in that yet, although the demand has increased a little bit, so.
Hope springs eternal.
Yes.
Okay.
There's also an anticipation that there may be a donation as a component of the Friends of the Glencoe Golf Club. And so that's why dollar figure is allocated in the budget as it is. But we will see how the prices come back. There's also an action we have to bring this to the zoning board. It's something that we'll be doing probably sooner than later as well, to get authority for the nets themselves.
Those poor folks on the zoning board. I know I recruited a bunch of people, said, no problem, not many meetings, they're short.
There's a lot of meetings they've been dealing with.
And they've been screwed.
So are the neighbors aware of this project? I mean, has there been outreach to the neighbors regarding the netting?
We just had turnover actually on that street, so there's 2 new residents. And it really is only fronting 3 homes. And the ones that did not move are aware of it and are in favor of it.
That's the plan.
That's a huge-
That's the plan.
It's a biggie.
That's the Financial plan.
Get through the windows. A lot more patience that way.
Any other questions on capital? Okay. Okay. So after the presentations this evening, what we're really seeking any feedback, questions, concerns that you haven't voiced already, the design analysis, any of the department presentations that you heard tonight, and any of the CIP recommendations. Last questions, concerns.
One takeaway I know, we will update the financing plan and the CIP before December. So we have that included in there, the other ancillary issues that, thank you for finding. As we go through this very long document, I'm always glad when somebody else finds a problem and it's not just me. And then Nikki doesn't look at me cross-eyed all the time.
So my question is, well, first a comment. Thank you all of you. I know all of you and others that aren't here spent a whole lot of time and effort to synthesize this down and make this presentation as efficient and as well thought out as it is. Thank you. But my question is, okay, we've got budget limitations as it is. We're spending down reserves rather quickly. We've got projections, in fact, that show us, and granted, they're very conservative projections, but still projections that show us going below our desired minimum reserve of even 25%, which I personally cringe at and think that's too low. And so understanding that, understanding the staffing shortages we have, certainly in public safety, but just in general, issues with trying to recruit and retain. So you have people power issues. So what if you had the people and you had the resources, what else would you want to do that you can't do because we don't have people and resources? The things you're like, nah, we can't get to that. No, that's a great idea, but talk to me about that a year from now or 2 years from now. I'm curious if there's anything in particular.
I'll start and then I don't want to hog the table. I mean, the department heads have great thoughts relative to their individual departments. I would say if we had more opportunity to do so, we would be implementing technological changes in various components of the operation. Work order management, something that we've talked about at length in the Public Works Department relative to day-to-day operations, putting more technology out in the field, putting more technology into all of our vehicles, automating certain processes and building out efficiencies where we can. A lot of times we struggle with not the desire, but the ability to implement. And to put those operational things into action usually takes people away from another task. And I will say in the last 2 to 3 years, we've been taken away by a lot of things outside of anyone's control. And keeping the lights on has really been primary goal and responsibility. making sure that those core level services are continuing to be provided, whether they be by the Public Works Department, the Public Safety Department, or internally, has really been the focus as we launched into the pandemic and have since emerged from it. And the new challenges that are in front of us relative to inflation and getting equipment now is the problem. For instance, we had in 2022 a much more robust spending plan than we were able to deliver on because we couldn't get the stuff. And so I think to some degree, there's a management of what are we capable of doing with the manpower that we have? What do we have the resources to apply toward all of those things? And then how do we manage that in kind of the environment of the unknown? The things that are unexpected, the issues that come up. Grants sometimes come up. The crib wall project with the Park District, I think, is a really good example of that we had hoped for a much more robust, we applied for a much more robust funding structure from Brad Schneider. We did not get that, but we got part of what we were hoping for. But that project admittedly wasn't really on our radar screen even a couple, 3 years ago. So as dollars become available, we're also reallocating how we might want to go and seek those because they're going to help. They're going to offset a cost down the road, but they may not have been necessarily anticipated as we built out these documents. So I would just say, I think as we look at it, and we are contemplating over the coming 3 or so years, a real focus on the organizational structure, the staffing that we need kind of on an ongoing, looking out into the future basis. Where are those internal needs going to be? And how do we make sure that we're continuing to deliver on really the mandate of serving the community? And what can we do differently to make that easier? It's gonna, I'd love to be able to say that we could do some things that really alter our revenue scheme. The problem is, as Nikki mentioned before, as a non-home rule community, you really have this constraint and you work within that box. I think as we continue to contemplate and not the current version of the board, but the previous version of the board, we went through 18 months of discussions relative to form of governance. I think we're probably going to need to brush that off again and have those conversations about whether home rule really is a better tool for us on a lot of levels, to perhaps reduce some of that reliance upon a property tax bill, to perhaps find ways to spread out revenue generation to people who don't live here. That's something that we talk a lot about, but you don't have those levers to pull. So that does constrain what we talk about even in terms of how we build out these budgets. But I would say, we have the departments are very thoughtful and very considerate about budgetary restrictions when they come and put these together, and we sit through and gut through a line item review of everything. And what ends up on the cutting room floor doesn't go away. It stays within kind of the internal psyche of the operation. And we find ways to bring them back or to kind of restructure the concept. So there's a lot in here. This is an ambitious budget again, and we like that. I like that because there's a lot that the community needs, and we want to make sure that we're presenting that to you. But within the restrictions and restraints that we have, constraints that we have in place. So, but I'd open it to Dave or Carrie, in a dream world, what else might be out there, and I know there's some stuff.
Yeah, from our perspective, there's not a lot of physical things that we need. Again, it's all our model of services employee driven, so we just need our staff. By having, to your point of, if we had a wish list, if we had full staffing, we'd be able to do much more regarding training for our employees. We'd be able to have more officers get specialized skill training and different things that they want to do. Right now, we just can't afford to do that. You know, we're just trying to get the basic skills to get them on board. So from our perspective, if we had more staffing, we can develop them more than we are right now.
You can get into a virtuous cycle of being able to provide a more interesting work environment for everyone.
And at the same time, it makes it a more attractive place for someone to want to come and work for us.
Exactly.
Because usually, since I've been here, what drives people to this model is the ability to train on so many different things. And we've kind of been unable to keep up our end of the bargain. And I'd like to get back to where we can. But Andy, anything other than that?
I would echo that, the training and the drive to bring people here, some of the technology that comes along with, the crimes are getting more complex and they're expanding more than just our boundaries, and being able to offer our services and try to apprehend those criminals is a challenging aspect.
I think for Public Works, we talked about some of the staffing additions. Those will have meaningful impact both in the building division and relieving Public Works, both the supervisory and operational staff from some of the facility responsibilities. Fully staffed, like the chief, fully staffed, that allows us at the operational level to be able to devote 100% to the maintenance of the infrastructure. We've got aging sewer and water systems that require daily maintenance responsibilities that we don't often consistently complete on a weekend, month-on basis, and it's all a function of available hands. And so that's comes down to management. I mean, personnel is such a large part of our budget, but with good reason. It's a very service-oriented business, both on many sides of the village's operation, but particularly on the Public Works side.
Isn't it the elephant in the room, the water plant? I mean, we've got this huge thing. I've been looking at this as a citizen. I mean, I thought Feldman was going to take care of it, and I thought, his successor to take care of it, and I thought, okay, maybe we'll do it. And now I think, I guess it's somebody else's problem, but that's a huge problem looking down the road, and we have to be, we just have to be thinking about it and trying to be in a good position. Otherwise, we're dropping a bomb on somebody.
I think,
and the 8,500 residents of this village.
I think that's a great point, and I think it certainly remains very much front of mind with us as we contemplate a future for that component of our service delivery model. What we know and what we have done in the last 10 years are a series of studies and analyses relative to the concept of water production. We are going to finalize and sit with all of you in 2023 an analysis that we've done with our neighbors to the south in the village of Glencoe, who have a similarly vintage water plant. And what sort of opportunities might there be to share either the construction of a new facility or somehow partner in some way to ease up the cost of that. But what we know, regardless of option, is that it's fabulously expensive. And water is admittedly perhaps the most important thing we do on a daily basis that impacts every one of our 8,900 residents every day. And so it is a huge community question that we're going to have to contemplate because the cost is so significant. We've talked about what that might look like. And when you're talking about tens of millions of dollars for an organization the size of ours, for a community the size of ours, you really do have to look at a number of options. And some of those options may be uncomfortable for us. And I think what we will be doing in the next 3 years is really drilling into what additional information do we need to be able to feel confident that the right path is ahead of us. And I think, the board is going to need more information on it. Staff is still developing its own understanding and awareness. And then there are the outside influencers, the EPA and the quality standards that we will have to comply with. All of which may be on a schedule, not unlike lead service line legislation that we don't like. It may be their schedule, not ours. And I think that's the other part of this, is that we may not be fully in control of our destiny when it comes to water. But it absolutely, you're right, President Rowan. I mean, there's very few things that are as important as that component of the service delivery model that we provide. So that's going to be a big part of our conversation. The other thing I would say, and both Carrie and Dave referenced it, but it's an aspect of what we talk about a lot in the manager's office, is kind of this commitment to continuing to be an employer that will attract the best employees possible. The strategic plan, which really is in its last breath, focused very heavily. One of the 4 goal set areas was solely related to staffing, which the board should understand is a unique priority for a board to set, remarkably, considering that 80% of our budget is people. It's unique for a board to say, this is an area that we want to focus on. I think as we continue to build out and understand kind of the changes in expectations from an employee standpoint and what we as an employer need to contemplate, I think there are going to be policy changes. There are going to be things that we bring back to you over time that perhaps are out of the mainstream for government, but may need to become part of our reality because of a variety of factors. Where we're located, the size and scale of the organization, what's expected of people when they walk in the door. We set really high standards. And I think, as you've seen tonight, we have really great staff who find a career, at least for a portion of their career, with us and contribute to the quality of life that the community enjoys. How do we continue to keep the best and the brightest here and attract them when those that find it time to move on do? Those are going to be other aspects of what we do and think about and talk about in the coming years. And we continue to focus on that even in this budget, with training and with, as the chief has said, getting ourselves to a place where we are fully staffed in the public safety department and the public works department, where those opportunities are no longer vacant, but they are being built and rebuilt in an environment where we've seen about 75% of our staff turnover in the last decade. It's amazing, but it's real, and that will continue. That cycle will continue.
You mentioned something interesting. Well, you mentioned a lot of things that are interesting, but one of which I want to focus on at the moment, which is in the same sense that we are going to try to hire somebody to take care of the place, right? Broadly writ. This is the person that will be responsible at a little level and at a high level for managing and organizing other people that would be brought in to help take care of the place and look ahead so we don't have problems, but we get ahead of them and properly maintain the place and everything else so that everybody else's job isn't impeded by that. And you've said, I'd like to get more technology, not just here, but pushed out to everybody that's out there, which is most of the people. They're out working everywhere else. Do we need additional personnel or a person to come in, think about that, and whose job it is to literally bring us up to 2022 at least, in terms of what's feasible, and figure out, funding that plan and what it would cost, and starting here and moving to there, et cetera. Because if you don't have that person, I'm guessing your people like ours, my little shop, have their hands full just keeping the lights on, so to speak, with all the technology issues.
It's a broadening of scope that we've seen in a number of areas in what we provide into the community. Technology, to use that as an example, is a never-ending need in an organization like ours. It's also a never-ending need from the standpoint of risk, from the standpoint of opportunity, from the standpoint of how we do what we do and how we can continue to do it better. But it's not the only area that we've changed a lot. And, when I started in 2013, we had almost no sustainability discussion operationally or otherwise. That has grown into a pretty significant set of responsibilities. Economic development is growing into a more significant set of responsibilities than we've had before. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is growing into a larger skill set and organizational need than it was even 3 or 4 years ago. What we are seeing and what we're beginning to put pieces together to address is the evolution of what we provide in addition to the day-to-day necessities, plowing the streets, the patrolling the streets, the maintaining of the water system, the maintaining of the sewer system, the urban forest, just cleanliness of the community, street sweeping. All of those are givens and necessities of the community. But we've layered on a lot of things over the last several years, and we haven't really layered on a lot of people to do those extra things. And so there's a couple of pieces that come into play. There's the technology piece, right? What does technology do to alleviate the workload so that you free those hands up for other work? What do those hands then need to also do in order to meet the expectations of the board, of the community, of the dynamic nature of government in the 21st century? So when you talk about technology, technology has a real value if it can help to limit what individuals have to do. And now we can put those individuals to work in a different way. Glencoe, and I think rightly so, has prided itself for generations. We've been around for 154 years now. We've been a council manager form of government, the first in the state since 1914. We've prided ourselves on being very forward-thinking and mindful of prudence in the way that we use the resources that are preciously given through a variety of means to provide the services that we need to provide. And what we have done is to work in a way that broadens a set of responsibilities out on every individual employee that we have, to the point at which sometimes the efficiency of having fewer people with more work to do means you don't get as much done. And I think what we're beginning to really start to scratch the surface on, and what we will talk through over this coming year and subsequent years, is how do you evolve that model that's really been in place as it is today since the 1950s, to be more responsive and to be more agile, and to perhaps give leadership in the organization more opportunity to lead and less requirement to be hands-on, so that you can think bigger and broader about technology improvements, about what aren't we doing? Should we be doing more with sustainability? Should there be a broader and bigger effort to train our workforce to be much more mindful on DEI initiatives? How can we put that in place when everything else is happening too? And so I think in the broadest sense, we are at a place, and an important place in the organization's history, where we begin to have these really revelatory conversations about what can be. And we're starting that. We're starting that internally. And I will say, as small perhaps as these two positions that we've proposed in this budget may seem, in the broader, bigger picture of what we're beginning to look at,
where we perhaps take a different approach to customer service in the way that it's provided in this building. Or perhaps we take a different approach to the way that we're planful about how we invest in a very significant component of our infrastructure. Those are steps down a path of what's next. How do we better invest in technology? How do we integrate strategy into that thinking? So that it's not just, oh, what can we buy to fix this problem? It's, we have a problem. Should we be dealing with it at all? Or should we find a way to solve it with a technology question? And so it's questioning our process, it's questioning our history, it's questioning our way forward. So again, these seem to, again, be somewhat minor steps, but they really are the first steps down what will be, I think, a bigger path that we're going to really explore over the next 3 years. Sorry, you got me on a tangent.
No, that's the kind of stuff I wanted to hear. And I will say, I think our community is lucky that you all, with everything else you're taxed with doing, are such forward thinkers and are constantly thinking about how better to serve the community and deliver the very, very high level of quality of services that we've come to know and frankly expect, and that you all do deliver, even now as shorthanded as you are. I just want you to know, on behalf of the community, I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, first, thank you for a very good budget. Are we done, or is there more? The only thing, just want to confirm that everybody's comfortable with community grants. Well, I was going to community grants. Okay. Yeah. No, I was closing the budget. There you go. There you go. And again, it was a very good budget. They always are. And they're so thank you. Okay, community grants.
Presentation on community grants. I'm going to hand it over to John.
Sure, yeah, the Community Grants Committee meets once a year for the purpose of reviewing the applications that's been received for a community grant to fund local organizations as deemed appropriate. This year receiving 5 requests. The history here shows that in calendar year 2022, $120,000 were awarded, as well as the just over $30,000 that was mid-year crisis emergency awarded to Family Services. Family Services Glencoe in CY 2022. This year, the request was $143,500. Community Grants Committee of President Rowan, Trustee Bree, and Trustee Rubin received and reviewed those applications. On Monday, November 7th, they heard the 5 presentations from those organizations and are recommending that the requested amounts be granted again in that same total. The budget includes sufficient funding for those requests already, and that's what's before you tonight.
Again, this is just if there are any changes or modifications. We have included the full allocation in the budget as it's presented. So that's just to underscore that. I guess I'll mention it. These are all basically offshoots of village activity for the most part, other than so we looked at this well spent money.
So look, the Family Service of Glencoe, that's a big jump from where we were. And, we had to think about it, but on the other hand, their name came up as part of our public safety. Because and we have to recognize if they weren't there, we might have to pony up a bigger part for public safety. So we, and the new director, Katrina, she is great to beat money out of people. And I recognize that includes us. And we should just take it and like it because they're providing great service. And the only other, it was a terrific meeting to listen to. We got volunteers, they're coming in, they're telling us what they're doing for our village. And we're glad they're there. Writers Theater, we need them. We need all of them. The other thing that was of interest, and it's not about them, but for the Glencoe Junior High project, they have always gotten money from New Trier Township, like for the last 20, 25 years. And Nutria Township, which I would note does not have anybody from Glencoe on it, decided that they were not going to give money to anything that didn't provide services to everybody in the township. And the Glencoe Junior High project, their play, which is their big events, is for Glencoe kids. You don't have to go to Glencoe schools, but you have to be from Glencoe. And they got dinged by and cut off by the township. And we sort of inquired as to whether they're applying that across the board, and the answer is the township is applying that across the board because we're it. The Glencoe Junior High project is the only thing that was different, and I regret it, but there's nothing we can do about it, and we still obviously want to fund the Glencoe Junior High project, which is valuable for kids in our village.
One thing that I would just make mention of, and I'm sure Christina talked about it a bit, they were one of the few social service organizations that received any funding from the Highland Park Community Foundation in the aftermath of the shooting on 4th of July. And they had made an application to that. They have been involved since that morning in supporting not only our community, but organizations and individuals in the city of Highland Park. And again, they're one of the few outside of Highland Park organizations that received a grant from that organization. I think just underscoring their value more broadly in the region, but the need has just continued to grow in Glencoe in the aftermath of Highland Park.
It's interesting that Glencoe Youth Services asked for less than what they got last year.
We gave them more than they asked last year. I think that's right.
Yeah, the request in both years was the same.
Yeah.
It was.
Okay. Anything else? Any other business to discuss? Or are we not done?
Closing,
Oh,
just keep
sorry.
closing, we're in the hard stretch.
No, I'm not trying to cut that. I just thought just looking at the agenda.
We'll get out the 4 minutes.
I was
Steps.
trying to cut it.
So we will take the feedback that you gave us today. So thank you for your candid feedback. And we will modify that for the final budget presentation in December. And that'll be the budget presentation, the appropriations ordinance, the approval of the budget, and the property tax levy. But before that, this Thursday, we'll have our official property tax hearing. That notice was published in the paper. We are required to have that before we adopt the property tax ordinance in December. And that will complete the budget process. And that completes our presentation.
Question, do we have any need for a committee of the whole Thursday?
It's actually a finance committee meeting,
Sorry.
and I would leave that to you. We could. No, I don't think we do, unless somebody's bringing up something in other business that needs a whole meeting for.
Good.
So we can cancel that, and then we'll start at 7 on Thursday evening upstairs. All right. If there's no other business, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. You can't second.
No, you're not.
Joe, we need you to second.
I can second.
All right. We were